Alright everyone, welcome to another stream of Bloodborne. We're going to be doing a lore through, looking at the item descriptions, the various dialogues from NPCs, and comparing them to the Japanese counterparts. We did a stream of this last month and had a lot of fun looking at everything, so just wanted to continue that. And before we head into the game, I'll just go ahead and play the opening cutscene for the game as well. So probably just be a moment before the game cycles back into that. I think for this time, or this run through of the game, we're going to look at a bit more of the content in relation to everything that we've seen in the past. I'll be doing a bit of a different quest line than before. Like last time we completed everything with Ariana, but this time I'll try to have her get killed to Adela, maybe send the suspicious beggar to the Erden Chapel and allow him to kind of feast on the denizens there. So a little bit different from the last playthrough, but if you did happen to watch any of the previous streams, it'll be pretty similar overall in terms of the content that we're going to go over. You may notice that this time I don't have any like of the commentary on the side. I think the primary purpose of this lore through is to more or less just kind of gain footage for potential lore videos or and like essays that I'll be putting onto my YouTube channel later on. So hopefully it'll play after the song ends right now. Alright, I'm too impatient. If anybody's really interested in the opening cutscene, they could really easily just find it on YouTube or just start up the game for the first time. But since the way that Twitch broadcasts, it's a little bit difficult to get that going.
Oh, yeah. Pale blood. Well, you've come to the right place. Yharnam is the home of blood ministration. You need only unravel its mystery. But where's an outsider like yourself to begin? Easy, with a bit of Yharnam blood of your own. But first, you'll need a contract.
So that's the opening cutscene of the game. Unfortunately, you don't get that kind of cutscene to play if you go immediately into the New Game Club Plus. It'll just automatically bypass this portion where you kind of create your character. It'll play the next cutscene. As far as his Japanese dialogue goes, for the most part, it's pretty similar. There is a difference where it says, instead of saying like, but where's an outsider like yourself to begin, easy with a little bit of a yarn and blood of your own. In Japanese, it's closer to, there's no way I could talk to a stranger, so first you should accept the blood from me. So that's a little bit of a kind of a flavor difference, which I think does kind of shroud the blood minister with a bit more mystery in the Japanese text. It makes Yharnam sound a bit more insular in that they do not deal with foreigners very much, or if they do, they kind of have to indoctrinate them into like taking the blood and literally becoming one of them. And if it's anything like how one joins the Vile Blood Covenant, it's similar to the idea of partaking Annalise's rotted blood establishes one as a kin of Canehurst, and kin in this sense is unrelated to the enemy type, just more like you become a blood family relative of that kind of organization through imbibing the blood and things like that. Uh, Sometimes it's a little bit unclear, but when the blood minister says, "Oh yes, pale blood," that should be understood as a response to an off-screen question posed by the hunter, our player. I will use a kind of a default appearance. I think this time I might play as a female, just because I don't really do that. Last time I played as a male. And there is some small differences in the dialogue between the genders. I'm not sure what starting class I want to go with. I don't really feel like waste of skin, just because it's a little bit annoying to level up. I think I'll run another skill build and just use the cane again because I'm the most familiar with that. I think for this run I'll be using a kind of a what is it? The oh yeah, the foreign garb set, just to make it a bit more like cinematic in terms of like using it for like lore videos and things like that. So just using the default foreign appearance will make the game a little bit harder just because the defenses of it are so low. But it shouldn't be too bad. I might crash against the Cleric Beast again. We'll see.
Good. All signed and sealed. Now, let's begin the transfusion. Oh, don't you worry. Whatever happens, you may think it all a mere bad dream.
Alright, so for the majority of these cutscenes, I'll try to be silent to just kind of let them play for themselves. I'm not trying to ignore your question, local soul leader. Welcome to the stream. I'll talk about that as soon as this is over. Um, the only reason why I'm talking now is just because I'll go back through and edit this footage to just get rid of my voice.
Ah, you found yourself a hunter.
So there's really a lot to kind of unpackage there with that first, or really kind of the second cutscene for the game. Before going into that, I'll just go ahead and read local soul leader's question and answer it. Unfortunately, I did see like the little message pop up that I got more comments just from like the PS4. So fortunately, it doesn't seem like I'll get like full-on raw footage, which is a little bit of what I was hoping for, but that's okay. So local soul leader asks, your character, being a foreigner, indoctrinated Gascoigne is as well, and is Yamamura not also from a distant land? Yeah, many of the hunters that we really see seem to seem to be from like kind of foreign lands. Alfred might not be, maybe Ludwig might not, but definitely the vast majority of them are foreigners to some extent. Like Eileen can be inferred as being from a foreign land because of the crowfeather garb, although that might have just been passed down to her from a foreigner. I suppose it's a little bit ambiguous if you really wanted to kind of stretch that interpretation of it. Yamamura and Volter are most certainly from foreign lands. Gascoigne was as well. His attire clearly states that as such. Gehrman could be, he might not. Suppose that's a little bit up in the air as well, but there is a very strong trend of foreigners being hunters in this kind of universe, and it may just may be because of the way in which the contracts are formed. And going back to that idea of the contracts, many people wonder like the significance of the blood minister and the contract that he has to give to the player. Is he necessarily a an emissary for the moon presence or the doll or some kind of other cosmological force, perhaps Erden? We don't fully know the answer to that. His cut dialogue is also very interesting in that he says, "Woken up with something of a nightmare, have you? A foul, murky story, quite beyond my own reckoning. Won't that be something to tell the grandkids, eh?" And then he laughs a little bit and he says, "Oh, but I've nothing more to tell. I only show the way, and the way has been shown. Now, it's in your hands, until the dank, sweet mud takes us all, upon the awakening of Ebritus." And then he laughs some more. So, I normally say it is Ebriatus, but his cut dialogue can be found on YouTube, like the full sound files, and he says Ebritus, and at that point in development, it is extremely likely that Ebriatus was the name of the moon presence in that version of the build. So in the earlier drafts of the game, he did seem to have a larger connection to the moon presence, although I say larger, it's still very minuscule, all things considered. Like, he might know about it, but it doesn't necessarily show that there's a substantial relationship beyond that. So, having a monologue on that for a moment, I just want to turn our attention back to that cutscene. After we have been administered the blood from the blood minister, our character begins to have a kind of a hallucination or a nightmare of sorts, where she sees a beast rising out of a pool of blood, and then it kind of slowly crawls towards the hunter and extends its hand or its claw towards us, kind of in what may be uh, related to like the kind of beast embrace rune, or part of like Vicar Amelia's prayer, where she says, "Beast will lure meek," and things like that. So it seems like that allure of beasthood is inherited within humanity, which kind of does get reinforced with the beast claw hunter tool that we can find later on in the Forbidden Woods. Um, the beast will then kind of erupt or self-combust in flames, and immediately after that we get those kind of gaunt white skeletal figures that crawl over our body, and those are the messengers, and they seem to be the ones who more or less force the hunter into unconsciousness and lead into the doll's line there where she says, "Ah, you found yourself a hunter." So immediately after that, we do wake up into Yosefka's clinic. There's nothing around. I mean, we've got like operating tables, medical supplies, various bottles, and like blood vials, things attached to there. Various kind of operating chairs with straps in them, and the way to the back room is closed. The only piece of significant information that we can find within here is the note on this chair, which says it's a handwritten scroll and seek pale blood to transcend the hunt. There's a lot to say about this, in that handwritten scroll in Japanese is closer to something more along the lines of something that's been written hastily in your own handwriting or scribbled in your own hand. Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt. Pale blood, a little bit more literally, would be paled blood, or blood that has been pale or become pale, has been made pale. I know that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense at like a surface level, but one of the ideas behind that could be that the idea of having blood that's gone pale could be that it's been drained of something within it to make it become pale blood. And I believe that's pretty significant when we look at one of the interviews that Hidetaka Miyazaki, the director of the game, gave with Future Press, if I remember correctly, where he says like the pale blood sky is supposed to evoke the imagery uh, of a body that has been drained of blood. So this idea of draining blood possibly being related to pale blood, I think is worth noting and kind of keeping in mind. And then the final portion where it says to transcend the hunt could be more of a localization flair to allude to the kind of third ending where you transcend humanity and become an infant great one of your own. Whereas the Japanese is a bit more muted in that regard, and it just says to complete the hunt. So to just recap that, it's written hastily or scribbled in your own hand. Seek paled blood to complete the hunt. So uh, that all being said, it's still very hard to understand what it means by that. Paled blood is supposed to be a reference to the moon presence, and we will find that out when we access the lecture hall and find a note there which is supposed to explicitly state that, but it just kind of seems to have ended up on the cutting room floor and just wasn't fully translated into English, at least with the latest version of the Japanese text. It just doesn't match up with the English or the Korean or even the Chinese, as far as I know. So, with that note out of the way, we should inspect our inventory. We have a hunter's mark and the foreign set, and then that's it. So, the hunter's mark is a dangling upside down rune etched in one's mind, the symbol of a hunter. By focusing one's thoughts on this rune, a hunter loses all blood echoes but awakens afresh, as if it were all just a bad dream. I don't remember if there's anything significant in the Japanese for that. Let me try to double check real quick. By thinking of this intensely, abandon your dying bowls of blood and awaken once again. Everything you will have done, it just seemed like a nightmare. So it's very similar. The idea of bad dreams and nightmares. In Japanese, the word for nightmare is literally just like bad dream. So sometimes it can be a little bit hard to be consistent with kind of translating things at times, because in English sometimes just saying like bad dream instead of nightmare just sounds more natural, although it might have a bit of a small like context missing if we consider like the hunter's nightmare is a location and the hunter's dream is referred to as a nightmare at times. So it's just a little bit hard to kind of keep that level of consistency when translating between languages. So I do think that the hunter's mark itself is supposed to represent the idea of a hanged man upside down. Um, I know that kind of gets ahead of ourselves here, and it's really hard to kind of piece together. It's not terribly important, but the idea that it's a hanged man does match up with the idea that it's an upside down rune etched into one's mind. And that kind of imagery gets reinforced when we enter the hunter's dream or look at the various forms of the hunter's mark that we can find within like the Chalice dungeons or even on one of the tombstones in the hunter's dream. So I do like to point out that the hunter's mark itself also matches the symbol next to the blood echoes. I think this we could interpret it like as being possible that the role of hunters is to more or less harvest blood echoes and more and kind of free them into the hunter's dream. That's a little bit of a stretch, I'll admit, more conjecture on my part, because it just aligns more with what's in the crow feather garb that we can get from Eileen and the Hunter of Hunters. Baros Igari, welcome back. It's nice to see you again. You ask, do the little lines at the top mean anything? I'm sorry, which Are you talking about on top of the rune? The scratchy looking ones? That's a very good question. I don't necessarily think it means anything. I would want to like double check like the bold hunter's mark. It could just be that the scratches make the rune itself a little bit unclear, and that's why it's not as effective as the bold hunter's mark. But that's pretty much all I could guess about that. So, right, that's the hunter's mark, and now we have the foreign garb. So, this is the black hood. It is a hood worn upon awakening to the nightmare of blood and beasts. Perhaps its wearer had to stay out of sight and travel by cover of darkness. Without memory, who will ever know? So there is a very significant difference in the Japanese, in my opinion. The whole idea of awakening to the nightmare of blood and beasts. I initially would have thought it was just kind of a contextual thing in the Japanese because there's a particle, the ni particle. It's a part of speech which can denote like location and kind of sequences of events and things like that. So at times it can be ambiguous as to whether or not ni means like from or to or toward or at. Whereas what we really get is the kara uh, particle, which specifically means from. So it's clothing that was worn when you awoke from the nightmare of blood and beasts. And so I believe that is supposed to set up that the little cutscene that we had with the beast coming out of the pool of blood and then messengers, that is supposed to be that nightmare of blood and beasts, in my opinion. A lot of people tend to believe that the Yharnam that we're encountering over the course of the night could just be a nightmare. I think that's a little bit that idea gets a little bit diminished when you look at the Japanese version of the text. Not to say it isn't like it's not incompatible at all. It's just not as strongly argued, I believe, when you look at the Japanese for that. Um, the foreign garb is clothing worn upon awakening to the nightmare of blood and beasts, not typical clothing for Yharnam. Perhaps it is of foreign origin. It is said, after all, the traveler came to Yharnam from afar. Without memory, who will ever know? So the trousers are the same, but the bandages are a little bit different. It's bandage worn upon awakening to the nightmare of blood and beasts, terribly worn and unsanitary. A faint memory recalls blood ministration involving the transfusion of unknown blood, not long after the nightmare began. So I believe that is a little bit clearer in English that once you get the transfusion, the nightmare begins right then. I think there was another slight difference in the Japanese for the entire set. Oh, right. So it says, without memory, who will ever know? The Japanese is just a little bit clearer, and it says, like, now your memory is unclear. So it's a little bit more explicit in that regard. Alright. So that's pretty much everything for this room, and we've officially begun our night as the hunter, and we will encounter our first beast very shortly within this clinic. So coming down the stairs, we get some like glimpses as the kind of place that Yharnam is. The floorboards have been like completely broken and pried up. It almost looks as though something crashed down here. We don't really have an idea as to what that would have been. I mean, honestly, like a lot of the environmental stuff in Bloodborne is more aesthetically related to the game rather than like storytelling. That being said, though, there is definitely quite a large amount of storytelling done in the environmental design. So, coming up here, we kind of get a developer note held up by messengers that tells us how to control the character and things like that. And that's what all of the notes and the clinic will be about. So I'm not going to worry too much about those. So coming into the next room, we find a lot more operating tables, cluttered pieces of paper strewn about. And a werewolf over a pool of blood, clearly feasting on some corpses. I do like that the corpses will kind of wiggle along with the Scourge Beast. It's a nice touch. Sometimes FromSoft's animations can be a little bit lacking in that regard. When you lock onto the Scourge Beast here, you see that its HP has already been diminished by over like half of its maximum. It's questionable as to whether or not the Scourge Beast was fighting these kind of Yharnamites before we arrived, or why it's in this state. It may have just been like an opportunity for the players to have a better chance of surviving this encounter if they knew what they were doing. It'll maybe make it a little bit less tedious for experienced players. Baro asks if there are bone saws on the tables. I'm not entirely sure. It's a little bit easy to see if got the monocular. Not so sure I see bone saws, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were. So you do get like a bunch of like needles and things like that. The old style syringes. So if you do come up to this Scourge Beast, it's got like a kind of a scripted thing to turn. Oh, I guess it's not too scripted. I thought it was gonna like turn around slowly and I would have been able to cheese it, but I guess that's not true. So I do like. Oh, I got stuck on the table. That it has like glowing yellow eyes. Oh wow. Alright, it's fine to die here. It's not a big deal. It's almost kind of like a... Not like a forced death, obviously, because you can kill it if you're playing better, but most people will die to this Scourge Beast on their first run of the game. So, despite having been quote-unquote killed, we find ourselves waking up to a completely different environment. We awaken into the Hunter's Dream, which most likely serves as a kind of middle ground between life and death, and one of the metaphors which kind of gets reinforced with that idea is that in the world of Bloodborne, we have sleep and unconsciousness serving as metaphors for life and death. A dream is kind of a place that exists between waking and sleep, and deep sleep rather, and it serves as a middle ground of being able to remain conscious even though you're technically unconscious. So that idea of existing between a state of life and death is kind of really important to understanding the mechanics of Bloodborne. And I believe that idea really gets reinforced in that we can access Central Yharnam as well as the other access points throughout the world. Tombstones with messengers in the Hunter's Dream. So we can go back into the first floor sick room of Yosefka's clinic to examine or to continue our story. So even though we're dead, we can awaken anew as though nothing ever happened. So it's not entirely clear like how that power comes to be. Some people will think that it comes from the moon presence. Others may think it's just a property of hunters, and they may have been chosen by messengers and things like that. And before you can access the Hunter's Workshop building itself, you need to open the gate into Central Yharnam, so I kind of died before that happened, so that's why we can't go inside the building right now. Coming up the steps, we will get some messengers offering us gifts. The messengers offer you a trick weapon. Choose one. Trick weapons are wielded with the right hand and employed in beast hunting. So we get 3 options between the saw cleaver, the hunter axe, and the threaded cane. I'll go ahead and read all 3. So Barros asks, messengers got the power to do that? Yeah, it seems so. It seems like they're kind of like the ferryman into this kind of dimension or extraplanar world, whatever you want to call it, realm, dimension, plane, dream. I think they're kind of all interchangeable, and none of them are really kind of wrong in that interpretation. It's just a bit unclear as to how the mechanics of that all really does tie together. So the saw cleaver is one of the trick weapons of the workshop, commonly used in the hunting business. This saw, effective at drawing the blood of beasts, transforms into a long cleaver that makes use of centrifugal force. The saw, with its set of bloodletting teeth, has become a symbol of the hunt, and only grows in effectiveness the more grotesquely transformed the beast. Let me just double check the Japanese on that. It's pretty close. The only real difference that I would talk about is that there's no kind of innate scaling of the saw cleaver to the more grotesquely transformed beast. It just says it's considered effective against those who've transformed into horrible beasts. So just a very slight difference, but a little bit notable, I believe. So looking at the hunter axe, it's one of the trick weapons of the workshop, commonly used on the hunt, retains the qualities of an axe, but offers a wider palette of attacks by transforming. Boasts a heavy blunt attack leading to high rally potential. No matter their past, beasts are no more than beasts. Some choose this axe to play the part of executioner. So that the last part right there is the part of executioner. That doesn't necessarily mean the church workshop variety of executioners. It just just the idea of the hunter axe, or axes in general, being a tool used in execution. That's where it kind of draws its inspiration from. The other aspect about the hunting axe that's worth note is it's a blunt attack is supposed to be a little bit clearer in Japanese, that it's a specific type of damage and not just a property of the item itself. I don't know if that's terribly clear on my part, but just it's not really just describing it for a flavor text reason. It's saying the hunter axe uses a specific type of blunt damage, and that is just a little bit muted in English, whereas in Japanese the word for blunt is put in quotes to just kind of make it stand out a bit more as a kind of a specific mechanic. So, oh, and the rally potential is important as well. It's the same in Japanese, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a connection between blunt attacks and having a high rally potential. It just it's high rally rates are a specific property of this weapon, and not necessarily blunt attacks in general. Okay, and now the threaded cane, one of the trick weapon duties. I do think it's interesting that for this one they say duties, but this one says the hunting business, and this one says used on the hunt. I don't know if somebody came up with a little bit of a variety unwittingly, or if they did that intentionally to just kind of break up the monotony of the items. It's a little bit unclear. I do know that at one point in earlier development, the threaded cane had a different translation for it, which was a little bit closer to the Japanese, but let me just go ahead and finish this up for now. Sufficiently deadly as a rigid bladed cane, but also serves as a whip when its blade is split into many. Concealing the weapon inside the cane and flogging the beast with the whip is partly an act of ceremony, an attempt to demonstrate to oneself that the bloodlust of the hunt will never encroach upon the soul. I'll just go ahead and read my retranslation of the Japanese and just talk about it later. The blade within this rigid cane functions sufficiently on its own, but by tricking it, the blade separates and is also able to be flailed like a whip. While it imitates a cane weapon, there is a kind of beautiful elegance swinging a whip against beasts, who has the intent and attempt for oneself to become unable to be engulfed in beast hunting blood. So there's that kind of substantial difference, in my opinion, within the final paragraph. I think previously I had like a little bit of it, just the last paragraph, like a slightly, I wouldn't say like wrong, but just I didn't emphasize like that there's a kind of like a play on words within in Japanese, like the idea of being engulfed by blood could um, like it literally comes across as like the blood is drinking you when you're using this weapon. So it's a little bit of a kind of a interesting part on the Japanese, but that's a little bit hard to get across to just purely English speaking audiences. So the next set of messengers offer us a firearm or a left-handed weapon. So we get the hunter's pistol and the hunter blunderbuss. So it's a pistol made at the workshop for hunters stalking beasts. Hunter firearms are specially crafted to employ quicksilver bullets fused with the wielder's own blood, boosting damage against beasts. The pistol is a quicker draw than the blunderbuss, allowing for speedier responses to attacks. Yo, like patches, says Barros. What do you mean, like, by that? So, I don't think there is much different with the pistol. Oh yeah, before I forget, the idea of quicksilver bullets being fused with the wielder's own blood. Quicksilver is a kind of archaic English term for mercury, the element, like the liquid metal. So those are what quicksilver bullets come from. And by wielding it with the person's own blood, some people might like to think that the hunter's blood has mercury within it, and there's a lot of mercury imagery being used within Bloodborne in general with its connections to the formless Great One Erden and things like that. Because you can also use the hunter's blood to create an emergency supply of quicksilver bullets, I can't necessarily like dispute those claims that like there might be mercury within the blood. It's just a little bit unclear exactly if that's true or how those mechanics come to be represented in the game. Some people think like having a higher blood tinge count makes one's blood a bit more tinged with mercury. One criticism I would have against those kind of claims is if like mercury is the active component in blood tinge and blood tinge makes like bullets more effective, it would seem like a little bit circular for mercury to make the blood stronger, just because at that point you can more or less like just remove blood from mercury to make it have stronger mercury. So it seems like pure quicksilver bullets would be more effective than blood tinged quicksilver bullets if mercury was like the active component of them. So Barrow asks, doesn't he say that the blood imbibes us? Yes. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying now. Like the Kane description was saying. I don't remember if he says that in Japanese. I know like they really did change around Patches' dialogue. So let me just double check that real quick. The blood imbibes you, and the ending. So yeah, no. Patches' dialogue does change a bit from the Japanese. In English, he does say the blood imbibes you, which I really like that line. It just doesn't fully match up with the Japanese, where he just says, in the end, you two might end up dying and rotting or becoming drunk with blood. So I feel like his Japanese dialogue is a little bit more straightforward, although he does use kind of like archaic grammar to make some of his points, or archaic words. So, okay, that's about it for Quicksilver and the pistol. So, let's look at the Hunter Blunderbuss. It's a blunderbuss created at the workshop for the Hunter's line of work. Hunter firearms are specially crafted to employ quicksilver bullets fused with the wielder's own blood, boosting damage against beasts. The impact of this highly effective weapon counters beasts' swift movements, and its widespread is nigh on guaranteed to hit the mark. The Japanese for that is pretty similar. I'm pretty confident with that. Instead of like a blunderbuss, it's kind of like a shotgun, which is the same, essentially the same thing. Um, Blunderbuss is just kind of a more antique version of shotguns, and it doesn't really like use shells, so it's, I don't know. I'm not the most proficient with my knowledge of firearms, so if someone wants to correct me, by all means, feel free. If you're watching this on YouTube later, go ahead and leave a comment if you really feel like explaining that for me. I definitely would not mind that. I am kind of interested in a variety of things, and so go ahead and let me know. Alright, yeah, so definitely pretty much the same. So last time I used the blunderbuss, this time I'll use the pistol. I don't think there's like too much of a real difference between them, so. And the last gift that we can get from the messengers is the notebook. A notebook received from the messengers leave messages with these loyal servants to share them with hunters in other worlds. So this does set up that the universe of Bloodborne is kind of more of a multiverse in that there are hunters in other worlds. Although, I mean, one can argue it could just be significant for the purpose of like co-op and things like that. But um, we'll just kind of roll with the punches there and accept the fact that there are kind of hunters in different worlds. Oh, and before I forget about her, we have an abandoned doll. I don't have the monocular, it'd be easier to show it off, but even when she's in her powered down state, you can see that like her fingers will twitch. She'll be important to leveling us up later on in the game, and she'll be in kind of a motherly role for the hunter, or kind of more of a supportive caretaking role for the hunter later on in the game. So we trade in blood echoes with messengers to buy and sell items. So from here we can finally look at our blood vial and quicksilver bullet descriptions, as well as many other items. So, special blood used in ministration restores HP. Once a patient has had their blood ministered, a unique but common treatment in Yharnam, successive infusions recall the first and are all the more invigorating for it. No surprise that most Yharnamites are heavy users of blood. So there is a lot of confusion about like that last line for the blood vials. I'll go ahead and just read my Japanese retranslation in its entirety, just to kind of compare and contrast the two. So this is special blood utilized in blood medical treatment, restores HP. Those who receive the peculiar medicinal blood of Yharnam thereafter gain a sensation of life power from the same kind of blood transfusions. Therefore, many of the citizens of Yharnam are blood addicts. So that, I think, sets up a really important mechanic in understanding like the role of the blood in the game, and like people who drink the blood literally gain a high on life. And so this idea of the blood restoring HP becomes important when we look at the player's HP stat, and the help like the window for it. It says it's the power or will to survive. If this falls to 0, your strength will fade away. So this idea is tied to blood echoes and things like that, because in Japanese, blood echoes are a little bit more literally closer to the dying wills of blood, and what that really means is like the left behind hopes, dreams, and wishes and desires of the dead, and those are like kind of what inhabit the blood and give it its powers. So this idea of the dying wills of blood being tied into the power or will to survive, this lust for life, this wish to live and to kind of vicariously live through the hunter or like the people who imbibe the blood. That's what they gain like their rush of life from. It's essentially like literally like the wills of the dead to live again, and that's what gives them that high and what sustains them from taking a lot of damage and things like that. So Quicksilver bullets are special bullets used with hunter firearms. Ordinary bullets have no effect on beasts, and so Quicksilver bullets, fused with the wielder's own blood, must be employed. The strength of Quicksilver bullets depends greatly upon the wielder's blood tinge. So this just does tie into what I was talking about a little bit earlier with the Quicksilver and Mercury. Um, I do like the little icon for the Quicksilver bullet. It's like essentially like a half melted bullet with like a fingerprint on it and with like blood tinged into it. Um, so one of the ideas as to why they might use Quicksilver bullets, it would be that since mercury is a liquid metal, it will allow blood to be infused with it as opposed to something like a solid metal. Like you can't just like make it get tinged with blood. So mercury might be necessary just because it's metal and it can absorb blood. Perhaps I don't know if that's like chemically true in real life or not, but I think that's just like the inspiration behind the mechanic for the game. So the Molotov cocktail explodes in raging flames when thrown against an object, one of the oldest hunter tools available in the workshop. Since the tragedy that struck Old Yharnam, fire has become a staple in beast hunts and is thought to cleanse impurity. Certain types of beasts have an abnormal fear of flame. So, just a bit of a cultural note, like a Molotov cocktail is named after an actual historical figure. I don't remember off the top of my head like what his first name was or which country it was, but it was named after a person in real life. So some people take that to mean like um, the Yharnam that we are currently in is part of Earth or is based on a location in Earth, whereas when you look at the Japanese translations for the game, all of like the source material, it just tends to be a coincidence that it worked out that way. The Japanese doesn't really have any of those references to specific real world locations, so it's a little bit of a it's a little bit unfortunate that some people will go really far with the idea that like oh Yharnam must be on Earth, whereas like the Japanese doesn't really um, say one way or another if that's true or not. So the other important thing about the Molotov cocktails is that it says certain types of beasts have an abnormal fear of flame. So this will set up for us later on that certain characters' knowledge of the world is limited. Like Eileen believes that without fear in our hearts, we're a little different than beasts. This sets up that hey, even beasts have fear. So this hunter of hunters, like our senior, like she doesn't exactly know what makes beasts tick and things like that. Oh, that does remind me on one of the weapons. I should have looked at it or should have mentioned it earlier that the idea of I think it's the axe. Let me double check it. No matter their past, beasts are no more than beasts. Okay, yeah. So the Japanese for that is whatever happened originally, beasts are no longer human. So uh, that's a really important difference in that the Japanese sets up from like the very very beginning of the game that the beasts were once people, and that really shouldn't be too much of a shock, especially like once we encounter like Father Gascoigne and things like that. And this also sets up what happened in Old Yharnam. Uh, I'll talk about that a lot later once we get to that area, so I'll just kind of leave that for now. Sundry Saturn, welcome to the stream. You say, hi Protag, glad to see you streaming again. Thank you, appreciate that. What is the name of the Molotov cocktail item in Japanese? If I remember correctly off the top of my head, it's like a cayenne bean, which is literally just like fire urn. But yeah, like even if you like type that item into like a Japanese to English dictionary, like Molotov cocktail is like one of the first results you'll get, if not like the only result. Like to say fire urn in English just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So calling it a Molotov cocktail just makes it very clear like what this item is and how it functions, because it's just something that's very familiar to most players in like the Western speaking world. Like I remember in Final Fantasy VII they have Molotov cocktails and things like that. So It's just kind of an item that's or a name that's kind of transcended, like its source. Like most people, I might be speaking like a little bit too broadly here, but many people don't necessarily even know that Molotov is a name for a specific person that this item was named after. So. Next we have the Pebble. It's small pebbles found throughout Yharnam, can be thrown at foes, quite thrilling. The translation for that is very straightforward. It is notable that the shape of the pebble does kind of resemble that of an eye, in that like that little dark crater looking like thing could be like the pupil and the iris and things like that. There will be some evidence to kind of support that idea, and that we will get pebbles not only from carrion crows, which feast upon like corpses, but we get them from the eye collector enemies as well. So, what would cause like an eye to petrify into like this kind of pebble type shape is a bit unknown. It might be related to like how the figures in Yahar Ghul stuck into the walls are petrified. Unfortunately, we don't entirely know. It may also be like whatever is in like blood rocks and things like that, and some of the like the cursed blood gems might be related to these types of pebbles as well as like forming eyes on the inside once you get like enough cosmic stuff going on within the blood. So Sundry says, I see, much more generic in Japanese. Yes, yes. So coming to the messengers in the bath, we're also able to purchase a hunter set, which I think we can get as just like the caped variety is it in Central Yharnam itself. So Ludwig, the first hunter of the Healing Church, once recruited Yharnamites to serve as hunters. This hunter's attire was made for new recruits and has excellent straightforward defense, but not nearly enough to allow an ordinary man to stand any real chance against the beasts. I think there was a small difference in the final paragraph, but this does set up that Ludwig was the first hunter of the Healing Church. We can get this item or this set before we defeat the Cleric Beast and get our first badge. So that's kind of interesting that the messengers automatically recognize the hunter as the hunter and will like provide us a hunter set as well. Although this is just like the Yharnam hunter set, so. The final paragraph in Japanese is closer to this hunter attire was created for that purpose. It excels in simple protection, though should a normal person be challenged by a beast, would this provide any peace of mind? So it's a bit of a kind of hypothetical question at the end there. I do like that flavor that the Japanese gives it because it kind of makes the normal Yharnamite sound like either diluted in the protection that this kind of set will give, but the English just makes it a bit more of like a commentary as to like, oh, this isn't like that effective, whereas like the Japanese, that really does make like the idea of like Yharnamites going mad is something like a bit more reinforced, I think. And so this set is the same for all four items as far as the description goes. And that's it for the messenger items at this point in the game. So later on in the game, we will be able to use the kind of altars to access Chalice dungeons. Unfortunately, right now, like I don't have my monocular. Otherwise, I'd show off like a bit in better detail, like how the inscriptions on these altars do resemble the hunter's mark. So if we look at that, like right there, that really does have like a closer image to that of like a hanged man. Like the little dot in the middle is connected as though it were a neck, and its like arms are just kind of hanging over its head. This one right here is a little bit harder to make out for sure, but that's like very clearly just like a body type silhouette suspended upside down. And I don't think the next ones really have that, but the last one kind of has like an in-between. So it's a little bit hard to make out because of the ivy, but like the little P shape looks like a kind of like a leg crossed and it does resemble like the Hanged Man tarot card in real life. Later on in the game, we can find Gehrman chilling here, but there's nothing else. We do get the stump messenger bath, but right now it's empty. The stump appears linked to the nightmare, but there are no messengers. So in the Japanese version of the game, there are a few times where the hunter's dream itself is referred to as a nightmare, but that's a little bit been whitewashed in the localization, whereas it's just kind of called like a terrible dream instead. This is one of the very few instances where we still get that kind of thematic connection that the hunter's dream is related to nightmares, and it might not be so different from like the hunter's nightmare itself, or even the Nightmare Frontier, or the Nightmare of Mensis. Even though we don't really see the hunter's dream aligning with those locations compared to like how we can find masts in the Nightmare Frontier, and we can see the chapel of the Nightmare of Mensis from the Nightmare Frontier as well. We don't really get those kind of like locational markers in the hunter's dream. We just get these kind of like very tall pillars going on in the background in a kind of a grid-shaped pattern. The relevance of these is pretty well unknown. Speculated that these altars, or the reason why I call these altars is like I believe that's what Lance McDonald has said that they're called internally in the files. So it may have been that these at some point in development were supposed to represent the kind of home bases or hunters' dreams of like other people in like the real world. But as far as it like relates to this version of the game, it's really just kind of a mystery what they're supposed to represent, because they don't necessarily match up with like the ship masts or anything like that. And we do get a very large pale white moon. Maybe pale right now is a bad thing to say, but it's just a normal looking moon, even though we do know like the moon presence is obviously related to the moon, and more specifically the red moon, and that becomes relevant once we go into like the final cutscenes of the game. So we do get some more developer notes here. After taking damage from an enemy, there's a period of time in which attacking the enemy in return will restore a certain amount of your HP. That's the rally mechanic and things like that. This will also tell us how to use like the emergency quicksilver bullet supply by pressing up on the D-pad as well. I'm not going to be too concerned with that. So I thought there was one other thing that I wanted to talk about before I forgot. I wasn't going to talk about the garden quite yet, or whatever you want to call that area. There's like this great tree, but I can't seem to think about it right now, so we'll probably just go on with the rest of the game. I'll probably just kick myself later on for forgetting about it. So right, we can use the tombstones to go back into the waking world and awaken afresh as though it were all a bad dream. It's a little bit easy to forget everything you want to talk about when you're monologuing this much, or just going over so much content at once. So coming back into the dream, or sorry, the waking world, Iosefka's clinic, we get that Cleric Beast still feasting on these corpses, completely oblivious to us. If you look closely, its eyes have this like trailing silver glow to them. That is because it has collected our blood echoes, and for whatever reason, like blood echoes are associated with the eyes. It could just be like a leftover mechanic from like Dark Souls type stuff, but I do think that could relate into like how things like eyes and pebbles are important to understanding like the lore of Bloodborne. So this time with a weapon in hand, it's a lot easier to take care of the beast. So you can just R1 spam it and Fortunately, it dropped an item. It's not scripted to always drop an item, so we get some blood vials. And coming into the next room, things are a little bit nondescript. We get another developer note that tells us how to use our blood vials right next to this conveniently placed corpse of a man carrying blood vials. So this person is still clearly a person, especially when we compare it to the kind of corpses the Scourge Beast was feasting upon. So, if you look closely, this guy's left arm, or the one like closest to the bottom of the camera, is much, much longer than its right arm. It's almost as long as its like entire body, which shows that it's in a half transformed state, if not half transformed, just like a different kind of transformation than what we get from like the Scourge Beast over here. And this will become relevant once we encounter like the Yharnamites all around Central Yharnam, things like that. And there's another corpse over here, and he has the same thing going on. Like his arm towards the top of the screen is much, much longer than the one on the bottom. So even though they're wearing different clothes, they're kind of like in the same state, and they do differ quite a bit from like just the normal, more humanoid corpses that we will find throughout Yharnam. So, leaving Yosefka's clinic, we come into a kind of small courtyard that is riddled with graves and things like and statues and kind of dead-looking trees with a bunch of dead grass and coffins still laying out clearly. Over there in the distance we can hear an enemy, but not too worried about that right now. If we try to go on towards the back of the clinic, we will be stopped by a closed gate that can be clipped through with using the Scourge Beast to kind of force the player through the wall. I'm not going to do that, one, because we've already killed the Scourge Beast, and not really focused on sequence breaking this point in the game. So this corpse right here gives us 10 Quicksilver bullets, so even if you don't die to that Scourge Beast, you do get set up for a little bit of success going into Central Yharnam. And then once we open this gate, that will also open the the workshop doors itself, and we'll be able to talk to Gehrman and things like that. So immediately out of Yosefka's clinic, we are greeted by a sight of the Great Bridge ahead of us. Central Yharnam loads, and beneath the Great Bridge, we will gain like the sight of like the Church of the Good Chalice and Old Yharnam beyond it. So I do really like how the locations are set up and linked together within Bloodborne. It's not always like a very logical or efficient like layout as far as like a city's concerned, but I do like the kind of attention to detail that they do try to put into the games. So coming out, we see a bunch of like sandbags, or maybe perhaps it's filled with rice left out. We've got like already opened like medical bottles, perhaps like filled with blood or emptied, and like top hats. And interestingly enough, we do gain maybe not access. We will find like just a bunch of like coffins strewn about, and they're completely chained up and things like that, which does call into question whether or not the things within Yharnam will stay dead. There is some like cut dialogue from Father Gascoigne when he was an NPC cooperator that he would tell us to kill everything that moves, and even if it's not moving, well, don't be too sure. So it does really call into question whether or not like the things within Yharnam are supposed to stay dead, or whether or not like the people of Yharnam wanted their deceased family members to not be like grave robbed or have their remains disturbed and things like that. Immediately to the left of the clinic gate, we have like a kind of like a a carriage or a wagon that would be pulled by horses. And to reinforce that, we've got a dead horse next to another smaller carriage right here. The insignias on these aren't too important as far as like storytelling goes, but one of the more pressing things about Bloodborne is that you always want to be aware of your surroundings, and if you're not, you can very easily get snuck up on by enemies like hiding behind corners or patrolling and things like that. So this is very obviously not like a scourge beast like we found in the clinic, but he was immediately hostile upon like seeing the player. This is a Yharnamite, and like the ones in the clinic, its left arm is much longer than the right arm. I do like the that its like glove right here is like fully shown and exposed, whereas like on his other arm it's just like the hand that you can see. So it does kind of like show the logic of, hey, if your limbs grow, like that doesn't necessarily mean your clothes are going to grow, although that doesn't always work out when you look at certain enemies' transformations like Father Gascoigne. So the idea that I was talking about of like the dead not necessarily remaining dead might be related to like what we have with these Yharnamites just kind of chilling around on the ground. I don't necessarily think they were dead by any means, but just what might appear to be dead at a first glance might not actually be dead, and that could also be what Gascoigne is talking about. And so just as far as like the game is concerned, it does reward exploration by like having items in crooks and crannies here, and so we would gain some more Molotov cocktails by going into the corner and like looking around. So this is more of like a rickshaw, probably pulled by men, and we get some wheelchairs and things like that. It's a little bit funny how many like wheeled vehicles and methods there are rolling around in Yharnam, because it's really not like handicap accessible, all things considered. Lots of stairs and places that don't really line up to each other. So when we climb up this ladder, we will hear the scream of the Cleric Beast coming from the Great Bridge. I really like that bit of like storytelling there, just because it does foreshadow what's to come, and it does kind of lend an aura of like suspense and mystery as to what we will encounter as we go out. So coming up here, we find a first lamp of the game, and the lamps transport the players to the Hunter's Dream, and upon death you'll awaken at the lamps. So if we look closely at the lamps, we do get like some bells at the very top of them. They're lit once we activate them, and we have like a bunch of messengers surrounding them as though they are praying. And going back to like our first objective of the game is seeking pale blood to transcend the hunt, and so we will finally be able to gain a little bit more insight into that if we are observant enough to talk to this little bit of a kind of a hidden NPC. These lamps being lit does kind of highlight that there will be an NPC with which one can interact within like the buildings and walls and windows and things like that.
Oh, you must be a hunter, and not one from around here either. I'm Gilbert, a fellow outsider. You must have had a fine time of it. Yharnam has a special way of treating guests. Well, I don't think I could stand if I wanted to, but I'm willing to help if there's anything that can be done. Town is cursed. Whatever your reasons might be, you should plan a swift exit. Whatever can be gained from this place, it will do more harm than good.
So Gilbert's Japanese dialogue for that is extremely similar, so just going on to his next bit of dialogue.
Pale blood, you say? Never heard of it. But if it's blood you're interested in, you should try the Healing Church. The Church controls all knowledge on blood ministration and all varieties of blood. Across the valley to the east of Yharnam lies the town of the Healing Church, known as the Cathedral Ward. And deep within Cathedral Ward is the old Grand Cathedral, the birthplace of the Healing Church's special blood, or so they say. Yharnamites don't share much with outsiders. Normally they wouldn't let you near the place, but the hunt is on tonight. This might be your chance.
So this is our kind of first indication of where to go. One interesting point about Gilbert's dialogue right here is even if the player never reads the note at the very beginning of the game to seek pale blood to transcend the hunt, we will ask Gilbert about pale blood, which does show that like the hunter has some idea of pale blood before the game begins. As to why the player would have left themselves the note about seeking pale blood to transcend the hunt, it's a bit unclear how we came into possession of that kind of knowledge, whether or not we knew we would be a bit amnesiac from administration and things like that. So what Gilbert tells the most straightforward path to get there would be from taking the Great Bridge. So the most if the player was already like kind of familiar with the layout and the geography of Yharnam from like a lore perspective, not necessarily like a gameplay one, they would think that the most direct route to the Healing Church would be through like the Great Bridge. Even though Gilbert doesn't necessarily say it, it's the closest and most direct route there. So
across the valley to the east of Yharnam, you'll find the Cathedral Ward. Deep within lies the old main cathedral, said to be the source of blood. I haven't heard of pale blood, but that's your best bet if it's anything to do with unique types of blood.
So that pretty much sums everything up. He does say that it's across the valley, which is where Old Yharnam is, to the east. So it's interesting that like the sun, which sets in the west, is over there, whereas like the Grand Cathedral is this way, which might like reinforce the idea that perhaps Yharnam isn't on Earth, or perhaps like the roles of the celestial bodies don't necessarily align with what we find on Earth. But that could also be evidence that what we see right now is not necessarily what's actually out there, because it could be being hidden to us from the veil that Ram is providing over the town. So that is pretty much it with Gilbert's dialogue right there. When we come out to Central Yharnam, we will find like a bunch of Yharnam hunter mobs, and they are immediately hostile towards the player. If we look at them, they have very uncoordinated movement. Their attacks will cause them to become unbalanced really easily, and they're not terribly strong, which does show that if they were supposed to be hunting beasts, like the average Yharnamite probably wouldn't be able to provide much resistance on their own, which might be why they do kind of go out and hunt in packs. Part of the reason why they are immediately hostile towards the player is due to the scourge, which begins by inflicting the eyes, and so we'll find like a lot of enemies that have like bandaged eyes and things like that. And according to like some of the supplementary material on like the PlayStation website, it says like the people that have been inflicted by the scourge project like the beasthood within themselves onto those that they see. So one of the cooler things about Bloodborne, in my opinion, is like the rally mechanic. Once you take damage, you can regain some of that HP back by continuing to hit the enemies, and that kind of mechanic still comes into effect even after you've killed the enemy, so to speak, and they will continue to provide some of that HP back, provided you continue swinging. So one of the reasons why I really like that mechanic is because it sets up that like the best hunters are going to be ruthless and continue to attack well beyond what might be like a sane thing. Oh wow, got me? Yeah. Sorry for hitting the mic like that. So like the best hunters will make the most use of the rally mechanic, and it really makes it like the idea of like a hunter who's gone drunk with blood, or one who's bloodthirsty, bloodlusting, and things like that, like pretty hard to distinguish just from like a really, really good hunter, because normally like it wouldn't seem like a very sane thing to do to just kind of like savagely continue to strike an enemy like that. But if you've taken damage and you're trying to like economize your blood vials and things like that, it becomes really important to use the rally mechanic. So when we do encounter like NPC hunters like Gascoigne and things like that, they do have a very fast and effective like style of attacking very aggressively, but in a kind of like controlled fashion. But the way that it works out is that it still comes across as being like very explosive and animalistic in nature. So it really does do like a lot of like heavy lifting in terms of like characterizing like hunters, and I'm always so slow with that. Okay, I finally got one. I'm really bad at like pairing these I'll call these guys butchers just for sake of clarity here. The funny thing is, like, this guy isn't like a mini boss or anything like that. He's just a kind of strong enemy for this area. You don't even really get anything for killing it. Just some brownie points. Oh. So we got our blood echoes back. And we only get some blood vials, which is essentially less than what I started the fight with. So he does give like a kind of decent amount of blood echoes, but at like this point in the game, it's still pretty negligible, all things considered. So this opens the gate back towards Yosefka's clinic. It's not really much of a shortcut, just because you can slide down the ladder, but for the sake of completion, we're just going to kind of check everything out. There's really not a whole lot going on over here. We get a bunch of more like the chained coffins and coffins galore, and we do get some like statues of griffins on the buildings, but not a ton of significance. One of the more significant items over here is this kind of figure of a transformed man into the figure of a beast patient that's been crucified and set aflame over here. This does show that like at some point like the Yharnamites here must have been hunting beasts or more transformed people, and they were able to string them up, and to some degree they were effective, which is a little bit surprising because we'll find like a scourge beast crucified later on. It's pretty gigantic compared to like the average Yharnamite. So coming through this like kind of avenue here, we get more of the carriages and wagons that have been abandoned, and we do get a bunch of like tombs just kind of jutting randomly out of the ground. This doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, like to place a bunch of statues and tombstones right outside your front door. So that could also lend support to the idea that the Yharnam that we're in is a bit of a dreamscape or something along those lines. We get another crucified scourge beast, or not scourge beast, but a beast patient over here. And then we gain a lot more of the hunter mobs ahead. So one of the cool things about these kind of mobs is that even though they are partially transformed, they still retain the power of speech to a certain degree, which ties into the idea like madness is something like related to the scourge and not necessarily like just full-on transformation. If you want to like kind of draw lines between like a full transformation into a beast versus someone just afflicted by the scourge of beasts. I know that's a little bit like redundant and it overlaps a bit, but I think it's worth pointing out just because there is quite a variety between like the enemies that we find. So coming up here, we can talk to an NPC behind the store.
Are you that outsider? Well, sorry, but I don't want anything to do with you. Trot along, will ya?
To a very cold reception.
Are you that? Well, trot.
They really don't have much to say. So we do have like wells here, although like if you look down into them, it doesn't really lead to anything. I just think that's more of like a developer error more than like a lore thing. Bunch of coffins everywhere, things like that. So it does seem like the people of Yharnam were still somewhat reliant on using wells for water and things like that, which might tie into people like needing to use medicinal drugs or things like that to just kind of counteract what might be within the water within Yharnam and things like that.
Lads, you've come on. You'd open the door on a night of a hunt. Away with you. Now.
So all of the NPCs that we'll talk to will like immediately be able to identify the hunter as a foreigner, which is pretty interesting because like that doesn't really relate to whether or not you're wearing the foreign set, which we'll be doing for the majority of the playthrough, versus like more what do you want to call it? Normal Yharnam attire. No matter what you're wearing, like they'll still call you like an outsider and things like that. And if you're not like paying attention, you can get really easily like crept up on by like Yharnamites hiding behind like corners here, like that guy over there, versus like this guy over here. If you're overcome with greed with trying to loot this corpse, that the bloodstone shard. So now that we've gotten that new item, let's go ahead and examine it. So this is a solid shard that forms in cold blood. After death, a substance in the blood hardens, and that which does not crystallize is called a bloodstone. At the workshop, these bloodstones are embedded in weapons to fortify them. So that's a pretty straightforward description. Obviously isn't entirely analogous to what we have going on in real life. Like, we don't find chunks of like crystallized hardened blood clots that we can use to fortify items and equipment in real life. And we get some quicksilver bullets, and this guy's hidden behind a gate. We can't get him, but we will hear like a large screaming and a pounding coming from that direction, which does set up like what we'll come to see you later on, or very shortly here. So the Yharnamites that we will find like kind of patrolling this area and throughout the game still do retain some faculties of speech. They have a variety of things that they can say, which is pretty interesting when we look at like all the things that they do end up saying. Like smells like you, stranger, death to the minister, things like that. this town's finished. Many of them will call the player a beast, which does lead into what was like on the PlayStation website of like the people who've been afflicted by the scourge project their own inner beasthood onto people, and so that ties into like if these people see like normal people as beasts, it's because they project their own beasthood onto them. So it could just be like they don't see each other as beasts, and that's why they don't like turn on each other. And that could also tie into like why scourge beasts also don't attack these guys as well. Oh no. I got scared by the dude behind me. But yeah, it's certainly interesting that like even though they have some faculties intact, they don't they aren't entirely mindless. They aren't just aggressively attacking everything that they come into contact with. So it's kind of similar to like the classic horror films, like the zombie films where like zombies don't kill each other, or even like 28 days or 28 weeks later where like the infected don't attack each other. But unfortunately, like there's just not like a ton of material that explains how that mechanic really works out. I think like the idea of the scourge of beasts affecting the eyes could be related to oh no. Like the curse of cause and what we find in like the hunter's nightmare and like things like that. Part of the reason why I do think it's related to the curse of cause is once you do clear that area, like the celestial disc in the sky, which resembles the kind of like the kind of collapsed pupils of the eye of the blood drunk hunter, like that will go away, and it seems like the prayers of the hamlet of like the what are they called, the baneful chanters, they are calling for the bloodless to place a curse onto those of Bergenworth essentially, and they call them like blood crazed fiends. And so like the fishing hamlet priest says like no matter how much you have, like it'll never be enough in Japanese. So it could just be like the idea of the scourge of beasts could be related to like the anger of the mother Kos, because they violated her corpse, and the people of Bergenworth just kind of ransacked the village and searched their skulls for eyes in their like blood-fueled curiosity. So by making it so damn. Sorry, I'm a little bit distracted right now. I don't know where those guys come from. It confuses me. Like, they got behind me last time as well. I will try to finish my thought in just a second. I'm just a little bit distracted. So, with like the curse of cause and things like that, so the skulls were forcibly searched for eyes. And, oh shit. the idea of like Yharnamites or like the followers of Bergenworth never being able to get enough blood ties into like how a lot of enemies will call out for blood when they attack. Um, Being unable to recognize like their own loved ones might have been like one of the intended consequences of like the curse of Cause, because she lost her loved one because of like the bloodlust of hunters, or it could just be like the chanters, like they lost their loved ones because of the bloodlust of the hunters. It would be like a kind of like a fitting retribution for those hunters to go mad themselves and end up killing their own family members out of that same bloodlust. So I think that could be like one of the intended interpretations for like how the scourge is supposed to work in this version of the game with like the DLC included. I don't necessarily think like that reading would have been possible, obviously, before the DLC was released, but other than that, I really don't think we have like a ton of explanation as to why the Scourge of the Beast like afflicts the eyes and causes people to project their inner beasthood onto what they see. So I did get some cold blood, and I'll examine that in just a moment as well, now that that area's been cleaned out. So before doing that though, we can see what was causing that ruckus, the pounding on the door and those screams from earlier. Got like a brick troll or a large huntsman's minion. Or no, they're like yeah, no, they are hunters minions. So the large hunter mobs are like the large red guys. So, like a lot of their names are really similar, so sometimes I just kind of forget them for a second, or like what's called what exactly. So this is the Cold Blood Dew. It's a droplet of cold blood containing blood echoes. Used to gain blood echoes. Hunters, sustained by the dream, gain strength from blood echoes. They imbibe the blood with thoughts of reverence and deep gratitude for their victims. So there is quite a bit of a difference in the Japanese for this. Cold blood itself is shiketsu, which means literally like dead blood or death blood. And so it's supposed to be a lot clearer in Japanese, like the idea of like the will of the dead, which are like blood echoes, or are related to just like death in general. What else is there? Alright, so the final paragraph is a little bit different. It says, in accordance with the dream, hunters use dying wills of blood as their own power. May there be thanks and respect for the dead. So the final bit is supposed to be like semantically similar. I think it's just like the English makes it sound like a little bit more out of place in my opinion. That the idea of reverence and gratitude for victims is a little bit unclear, whereas like in Japanese it's like the idea is like we gain blood echoes from the dead, so we should be reverent towards the dead because we're carrying on with their legacies and their wills and things like that. So that's like the main difference. And the other like lore related information we can gain from the Cold Blood Dew that we have right now is that this is the very first tier of Cold Blood. It's put 1 in parentheses to show there's like a kind of a series of items which are all related, and so that'll be more relevant once we gain like the higher tiers of Cold Blood and the different versions of them.
I don't reckon you're from round here. Well, stuck outside on a night of the hunt. Oh, you poor, poor thing. I don't reckon you...
I love like a lot of the voice acting in this game. Like there's just really well done. Just like very sarcastic and comical, and the way that she just laughs in our face for being stuck outside in the night of the hunt is pretty funny. If you have insight at this point and you have like the beckoning bell, I believe Gascoigne's little old hunter bell will appear in this area right next to this the fountain. It's a little bit interesting that it appears right here because like his house is like right there. So these are some of the carrion crows. They're very, very large crows if like we would compare them to like normal crows in real life. Part of the reason why they're so large is because they have been eating on corpses, which have been filled with cold blood, most likely. So a lot of the enemies do get kind of transformed by like the properties of the blood. So even though they don't necessarily become beasts, they certainly aren't like normal crows by any means, which might be why they're so aggressive and will attack the player. So, oh, I was too slow. You can cheese this guy for turning around because it's scripted for him to turn around. So you can immediately just run up behind him and stab him in the back for the free visceral and most likely gain blood vials from him. And so, right next to this guy we have some more corpses. He might have killed them, we don't know. Some Molotov cocktails and the torch, which is one of the best items for like a lore run and for like really like lighting up your general surroundings. So let's go ahead and examine it. So torch. A common torch formed by wrapping a pine resin drenched cloth around the end of a long stick. Hunters choose torches not only because the hunt leads them to the darkest nooks, but also because certain creatures they encounter are possessed of a deathly fear of flame. So while this doesn't necessarily list beasts directly as being those things that possess a deathly fear of flame, I mean it's a pretty logical thing to conclude because once we go into Old Yharnam, if we're wielding the torch, the beast patients there will kind of recoil and flinch as though they are scared of it. So, I do like the kind of opulence shown within the Central Yharnam itself, like this very large and grand fountain. Even though it's not running right now, it's prominently in display here. The buildings are a little bit spaced apart, which shows like Central Yharnam is a bit of a more wealthy area, all things considered. I haven't shown it off, but if we go back into this plaza with the crucified beast here, like the doors will have like a bunch of signs on some of them, which could show that like this is a trade area. Let me try to find one real quick. It's not this one because that's the NPC place. So towards the beginning. No, but like this place has a bell, which has like a lot of religious iconography in this game. I was pretty sure that some of the buildings here did have like the signs that we can find in like the cathedral ward as well, like the residential district. That corpse right there does like show us like, hey, later on we'll be able to find stuff over here. I'll probably have to look for it again later, but it is a thing. Like I'm not entirely crazy here, but so I did forget to show it off earlier, but I may as well do it now. Within this gigantic plaza right here, we have a huge scourge beast that's been strung up onto a kind of crucifix with part of it like snapped off, like stuck on its arm. It's unclear whether or not the scourge beast was still alive and it ripped it off. I think that's like the idea that we're supposed to get, just because of like the very fierce expression on its face. It doesn't really seem to have legs, which I don't think I've ever really noticed before. It could just be maybe they got burned. But looking at the base of like the pyre here, we've got like humanoid skeletons at the base of it, which they are using to burn the crucifix itself. The crucifixes in this game do also resemble the Hunter's Rune. I do think that's intentional. And we can see like a bunch of these kind of crucifixes on like the Beast patience, as well as in the Hunter's Dream itself, where we will fight Gehrman and the Moon Presence later on. So if we just like strung this upside down and move the top beam, like that is pretty much a dead ringer for being in the shape of the Hunter's Mark, and it also resembles the kind of crucifixes the church servants do carry around in like the cathedral ward right before Vicar Amelia. And we get some more rickshaws and things like that. There's a shortcut over there, which I might, maybe I should access that now, maybe not, I don't know. So we get some more Cold Blood Dew, and the house that I had mentioned is belonging to Gascoigne earlier is right here. You can hear the music box that his daughter plays coming from this building right here, and we will get his like summon sign from like over there right next to that fountain. So we get some more patrolling Yharnamites over here. I was trying to get the dog by itself before they all appeared, and I had to deal with a gaggle of enemies. Didn't quite work out so well. I wanted to get the other dog as well, but so the dog will alert like the Yharnamites. Of like where the player's like location if it sees us by its barking. I do like those kind of like tells that the enemies have, like they've noticed you. I do get fascinated by like with how well like some of these Yharnamites can operate their rifles still, despite having like the elongated left arms, things like that. Some more blood vials. So we're finally at our maximum, and once you get more than like 20 vials or the Quicksilver bullets, it'll automatically go into your storage. One of the harder things to reconcile with Bloodborne as opposed to some of the other like Souls games is that like the healing items are finite and they are a precious resource, and so if you do run out of them, like you will kind of be forced to farm for them at times. It's a little bit unfortunate. I do understand why like a lot of players might not enjoy that aspect of the game. Like it can be a bit of a grind at times, I'll admit that myself. I do like that it is consistent as far as like the narrative goes, that like blood is a is finite. Like it is a resource, and while it is like somewhat renewable, like you do have to like work for obtaining it and like keeping a stockpile of it for yourself. Hello Paladin Archon, welcome to the stream. It's nice to have you. Right now we're just kind of bumbling our way through Central Yharnam and looking at things in as close detail as we can, and just talking about the general lore of Bloodborne. So this was the corpse that we had seen earlier from the what you call it, the plaza right there. And normally I would go to like the Cleric Beast, but since we did that last time, I'm gonna go ahead and drop down and go through the aqueducts and go ahead and get like one of the Madman's knowledges later on, and access the dream early, just to show like it's the insight which causes the doll to become active, as opposed to like encountering the boss itself and things like that. I mean, I know it's a pretty well understood mechanic. It's just, I don't know, something nice to change the pace of things, I suppose. Like a lot of the lore runs take a very similar approach to the game, which It's a little bit of a necessary evil if you really want to talk about things in depth, but since this is our second run of doing it, just going to vary things up a bit. Good old Bloodborne. Have you played Bloodborne a lot? Are you familiar with the game and or like the lore? Or are you just coming to learn some more? So these guys are what we call like large huntsmen, or like large hunter mobs, which is a bit of a mouthful and really similar to just like the normal hunter mobs. I should probably think of a good nickname for them just because it's a little bit hard to differentiate off the top of my head at times of like which one I'm talking about, because they're so similar, especially when you consider like brick trolls are technically called like hunters and minions, things like that. Like I said before, if you have the monocular, it's a bit easier to make out, but like these guys will have horns on the tops of their heads. They are much closer in nature to scourge beasts. They don't have long left arms, only like all of their limbs are kind of long and stretched out like that. So we do gain some more variety of like the enemies that we find in this area. And so we get some rats down there as well. And then we get some thick cold blood, tier 5, which is a lot stronger than the other cold bloods we've gotten so far. So, Soulsborne is your thing too? Well, glad to hear it. I'm always happy to have a Soulsborne enthusiast drop by and talk lore and things like that, and game mechanics. So that rally mechanic really becomes handy when you take like a lot of damage and like follow it up with a visceral, because it pretty much restores all of that missing health. So we gain our first like hunter set in the game if you don't access the dream at this point, or don't buy from the hunter's dream at this point. So we get the hunter set, which is different from the Yharnam hunter set, but I mean very. So the hunter hat is one of the standard articles of hunter attire fashioned at the workshop. A fine piece of hunter attire that provides stable defense to anyone facing Yharnam's beastly threat. Recognizable by its withered feathers, this cap is fashioned after one of the old hunters. So the rest of the pieces are pretty similar, so I'll just go with the hunter garb for now. One of the standard articles of hunter attire fashioned at the workshop, accompanied with a short cape to wipe away blood. A fine piece of hunter attire that provides stable defense to anyone facing Yharnam's beastly threat, allows one to stalk beasts unannounced by cover of night. So, as Paladin Arkin points out, it's interesting that the headpiece is modeled after Jura. I don't necessarily know if it's supposed to be Jura specifically, although I think that's a very fair interpretation to make, because we don't really get any other viable candidates for it, so I'm perfectly fine with saying it's modeled after Jura, because his hat definitely does resemble this, but just for like being like very explicit with like what is more like fact-based versus conjecture, it's just one of the lines that I do like to kind of draw as a lore enthusiast, in that I tend to want to be very clear as to like what's fully stated by the game versus like what is implied by the game and what I think the game is trying to say at times. Not everyone is about as like particular about that kind of thing as I am, which is perfectly fine, but I feel like I don't want to intentionally like mislead or unintentionally mislead anyone, so I just like to be very precise about that kind of thing, especially since like I'm already going through the trouble of looking at the game in a completely different language to just kind of get a better reading on things. I think it would be a little bit disingenuous if like I didn't at least try to do that much with the normal text in English as well. So these rats are obviously a hell of a lot larger than normal rats as well. I think they're related to the idea behind like the carrion crows and the manhunter pigs, and that those who imbibe the blood can get transformed by it in various ways, in kind of like accordance with its nature, or like the things that it's come into contact with. And so with these much larger rats, I think that just kind of like reinforces like whatever's in the blood causes things to transform. And so coming from like the Central Yharnam like residential district into the aqueduct, we are able to find like these statues of messengers aligning the walls here. It's a little bit hard to make out, but it's definitely like a messenger. And so we know that the hunter can see the messengers because we find them all over the place, but I think this is like one of the first like indications that the people of Yharnam to some extent must have had like some, oh no I missed, must have had some contact with messengers or some knowledge of messengers to kind of make it a religious iconography that they'd use throughout their city as well. So these putrid things right here are, I think they're, I forget if they're officially just called drowned beast or drowned men or burnt corpses. I think there is a little bit of both. I think like internally they were called like burnt corpse, whereas like in the guidebook they might have been called like drowned corpse, something like that. But if we look closely, like we can see like they're lacking legs. They've got extremely long arms. Both are the same length. They are not fully human by any stretch of the imagination, because I mean, what live person would just be chilling at the bottom of like a canal or a potential sewer type area with no legs and just face first into the puddles and stuff like that. So this does tie into the idea of whether or not these corpses themselves are actual corpses when we come across them, and by like killing them and like gaining the blood echoes, that keeps them dead, like as far as you know, reanimation is concerned. Like if we like come back into the area, of course they will be alive again, for lack of a better term, but certain enemies don't respawn, like the Scourge Beast at the very beginning of the game, but they do respawn. And I feel like I'm a little bit rambling right now, but like the existence of those guys down there might lead into why we can find so many coffins like over here that are completely chained up. So we gain our first madman's knowledge, and with it we can go back to the hunter's dream, and I'll do, yeah. Oh, too slow. So this brick troll right here was literally carrying a statue that he just bashed my face in with. So for some reason, even though like this like little residence doesn't have a lantern outside it, there's a person inside that we're supposed to be able to interact with.
Wretched outsider. Trying to fool me to open this door. Heavens, the depths of depravity.
So, like I said earlier, like pretty much every NPC will immediately recognize you as an outsider, and that gets relevant with Gascoigne's daughter here as well in a second. So, going back to the chat, we have Paladin Archon saying that you're glad that the Bloodborne community is still going strong. You believe you found me on Reddit? Okay, glad to hear that. Yeah, it's pretty incredible like how much longevity the game has, and I'm sure like it'll grow even stronger once the PlayStation 5 is released, next month, and people will be able to access the game for free on the PS Plus there. So I don't know if this will get any more updates. I mean, I doubt it will, but like if they do like patch it to run at 60 FPS or take advantage of the PS5's hardware, like that'll definitely be welcomed. So it's interesting. I went with the pimp cane as my starter. Yeah, it's my favorite weapon. I don't know. It's just it's got a lot of tools that make it effective. Maybe not so much at the very beginning of the game. Like it's not so great for like breaking limbs, but I like its normal like speed and range and its transformed range and crowd control as well. So yeah. Right, so this is where we find the music box's source. This will be Gascoigne's little girl.
Who are you? I don't know your voice, but I know that smell. Are you a hunter? Please will you look for my mum? Daddy never came back from the hunt, and she went to find him, but now she's gone too. I'm all alone and scared.
So we can find the girl's mother or refuse. Refusing, I think you can just talk to her again and undo it, but there's no reason to really refuse, so we're just gonna agree to look for her mother. I accidentally sat down because I held X and moved the controller, which automatically like does some of the gestures, which is a little bit unfortunate at times. Like I've seen people get killed at like the final portion of a boss's HP by accidentally doing stuff like that at times. So it's a little neat mechanic, but just it wasn't necessarily well implemented. I just kind of blame it and like Sony probably like forcing that part of it onto the developers, but they also included it in Dark Souls 3, so I don't know entirely for sure.
Really? Oh, thank you. My mum wears a red jeweled brooch. It's so big and beautiful. You won't miss it. Oh, I mustn't forget. If you find my mum, give her this music box.
And because I was sitting down, I can loot it.
It plays one of Daddy's favourite songs. And when Daddy forgets us, we play it for him so he remembers. Mum's so silly running off without it.
And so, like, the final bits of her dialogue right there, I take it to be is, like, the smoking gun that Gascoigne is the one who kills Viola, because it really, like, why would they bother to include those lines of dialogue if it wasn't supposed to set up that, oh, our dad who forgets us at times can be reminded by this song, but silly mom, she forgot this music box, and so Daddy's not going to recognize her, and he is going to end up killing her because he sees everyone as beasts, and that's just kind of like the tragedy of like FromSoft games. Like they really like to dial that up at times and make the player feel useless, and that like what you might think to be a happy ending isn't necessarily a happy ending, especially with like Bloodborne. I think they really dial that up for this game. Before I forget, when we talked to the little girl, she said she doesn't recognize her voice, but she knows that smell. This is one of the first indicators that there's something different about the hunter, the player character, than the normal types of enemies that we'll find throughout the game. The reason why she knows that smell is because her father, or possibly Henrik, smelled like that at one point, or maybe they still do. It's a little bit unclear. I would just kind of take it to mean like the currently active Dreaming Hunter has a peculiar moonlit kind of smell, which is what this little girl is remarking upon, and which does tie into like some of those environmental dialogues from like the Yharnamite enemies where they say, "Smells like you, stranger." So, yeah. Paladin Archon says, the beauty of FromSoft is that nearly all, or you think it is indeed all, of their stories about ruin and decay. Yeah, for sure. That is a very, very big theme, and something I'll touch on quite a bit extensively, especially when we get to like Valter and Canehurst and things like that.
My mum wears a red jeweled brooch. It's so big and beautiful. You won't miss it. Oh, and if you find her, give her this music box. Please, I know you can do it.
One like little bit of a linguistic difference is like instead of like saying I know you can do it in English, like she just refers to the hunter in Japanese as san, which is like, like Mr. or Miss. Like, it's a very kind of like a neutral honorific to give to somebody, but it just shows that like she does have like some semblance of manners and things like that. Of course, things like that are really hard to convey when you're trying to translate something from English or from Japanese to English, or even English into Japanese. Sometimes it's really hard to get that nuance of like how some of the characters view themselves in relation to each other. So a lot of times you kind of have to inject what might be like not necessarily like irrelevant information, but like extraneous information into getting those kind of ideas across. But I'll explore the note in a second, but I just wanted to mention that. Dark Moon 91, welcome to the stream. You say she seems to have faith in you, right? So it does show that even though we're a foreigner, like there does seem to be like some amount of faith like placed into hunters and things like that. The little girl recognizes us, maybe not necessarily like explicitly as a hunter, but she thinks that she can trust us, probably because of like that familiar scent or something like along those lines. I thought there was something else I was gonna say. Yeah, just like the honorifics and things like that. Yeah, they're hard to convey, so sometimes you have to add like a little bit of extra information to just like kind of help characterize the people of the game. So it's one of those things where I'm like not gonna really like harp on like the translators or the localizers are like, oh, they didn't say like Beast Hunter San, like that. Just it's really poor English and would really break immersion for the game. So I tend not to talk like about honorifics and things like that like a whole lot, except for like where instances where I think it like adds a bit more to like help understanding like the characterization of like um, some of the relationships between the characters of the game. So coming into this dark house, we have a wheelchair huntsman. He resembles like the blood minister, although he doesn't have the hat. It's pretty much the same model, he just lacks the hat, and I think he might have like a different jacket on. When we come into the Hunter's Nightmare variety of this darkened house, we will get like the actual like model of like the blood minister from the opening cutscene in this location. I don't know like why they chose to use that model versus like this one, but um, I don't know. It's just I don't necessarily think like that is the blood minister. It's just something worth pointing out, I suppose. So we can hear like a bunch of chattering going on in the background. That's because there's a couple enemies on the floor above us. I'll go ahead and turn up the sound for that.
This is a damn smells like you, stranger. No. Please, God, help me. I must live. It's cursed. This is a damn curse.
So yeah, there's like not a whole lot of like coherent things within that. Like they'll say, this curse, this is a damned curse. It smells like you, stranger. They'll like pray for like gods to save them and things like that. But it's I do like that like within this kind of a dark area where they can't immediately see you, like you do get like that kind of like extra information that you can get from the enemies themselves, because there really aren't like a whole ton of like talking enemies or like I don't know how to phrase it, like enemies that'll just like talk to themselves within like the FromSoft games, because many of them are like undead or like full-on monsters. So being able to just kind of eavesdrop on them is just something that's pretty novel for their games, and something that I do enjoy about Bloodborne. So within this building, we do get another lore note, which gives us some insight as to the state of the world. So, when the hunt began, the healing church left us, blocking the great bridge to Cathedral Ward as Old Yharnam burned to the ground that moonlit night. So, There is maybe a few differences, or it might have just been like a one or something like that within the Japanese version of this note. Let me pull it up real quick. My retranslation of that is, on the night of the beast hunt, the great bridge to the cathedral ward was blocked off. The healing church intends to abandon us, just like that night of the moon, when the old town district was abandoned in flames. And so the old town district is just like a really literal way of saying like old Yharnam. So that's like what it's called in Japanese. Like, so I probably should have just like listed it as old Yharnam, but just the idea that the the healing church is closing off the great bridge to Cathedral Ward to stop like the general populace of like Central Yharnam from escaping the night of the hunt, and so like they're cloistering, abandoning them, just like they did to Old Yharnam, and that's what this note is supposed to get across. And so some people get a little bit confused by saying like when the hunt began, the healing church left us. So that could make it sound like it happened like tonight, like when the hunt began tonight, or something like along those lines. I don't remember exactly what some people think about this. It's just like the idea that Old Yharnam happened before is kind of like what's supposed to like get across with this note. Like the healing church has already abandoned them to some degree, so like a lot of the people of Yharnam don't really feel super protected by the healing church anymore. So it's the Bloodstone Shard. And then this opens the gate back up to the lantern. And before I go back into the dream, I will read the thick cold blood that I neglected to do before, as well as the Madman's Knowledge. So looking at chat real quick, Paladin says, you do believe that Ludwig's story is also one of note? For sure, yeah. Did you have like any specific way that you wanted to talk about it being noteworthy, or just in general? So, thick cold blood. This is the 5th tier, and we don't have like the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, but each cold blood will scale in tiers of 3. So, at the 4th level, we will gain like thick cold blood, and 3 and below is just the cold blood dew. So, this is a thick droplet of cold blood containing blood echoes, used to gain a larger amount of blood echoes. A strong will produces thick blood, doubtless the product of obsession, a potent source of human strength. So this does have like a lot of differences in terms of like importance and nuance, in my opinion. So the idea that a strong will produces thick blood comes across like a bit too literally in English, in my opinion. So a lot of people think that like this is evidence that like thick cold blood is literally thick, whereas I would argue that it's supposed to be thick in the sense of richness. So a strong will produces rich blood, and so I'll just go ahead and read my retranslation of this description and then talk about it from there. So it's a rich drop of dead blood carrying dying wills of blood. Gain dying wills of blood from its use. Strong dying wills produce rich dead blood. It even resembles obsession, which supports man's strength. So it's a little bit hard to parse that. Like I know like the English retranslation of that is like a little bit stilted, but sometimes it's just kind of like how the Japanese comes across, even in Japanese at times. Like it's not very straightforward. Like it doesn't sound like it's making like a whole lot of sense, but within like the context of the game itself, like there's a kind of theme that ties madness to insight, and which we'll look at in a moment, as well as like the cosmos. And so we do get cold blood dew, then thick cold blood, and then the next tier of cold blood is like frenzied cold blood. And so this idea of like obsession and madness is strongly tied together in like the themes of Bloodborne and things like that, but it just is a little bit hard to understand at just like a surface level examination. So Paladin says, in reference to Ludwig, in general, really just his involvement with Lawrence, Gehrman and them all, which you believe hasn't been reached yet. Yeah, no, we're at the very beginning of the game, so we did get that item, which does talk about Ludwig establishing like hunters from the Healing Church and being the first one. But yeah, we haven't seen anything like about any of the other characters yet. We will see Gehrman very shortly, though, and how he used to be the first hunter of the Healing Church. Right, exactly. So, with the cold blood out of the way, we have the Madman's Knowledge. So, this is the skull of a madman touched by the wisdom of the Great Ones, used to gain insight. Making contact with eldritch wisdom is a blessing, for even if it drives one mad, it allows one to serve a grander purpose for posterity. So, I do have like a lot to say about this. I will repeat quite a lot of it throughout the playthrough, just because it's one of like the largest themes of Bloodborne, and it's a little bit been glossed over just in terms of the way that it was handled when it was translated from English or from Japanese to English. So this term Eldritch Wisdom comes from Shinpi in Japanese, which means essentially like literally like holy mystery or divine mysteries or sacred mysteries or mystic, something along those lines. But like the translation of it isn't necessarily like the part that I want to like emphasize here. It's that it's a very specific term that was used very, very consistently in Japanese, but it just was not used consistently when they localized it in English. Shinpi is what they use to make the arcane stat, and so I would argue just for like in terms of like consistency with the terms we've already been given, that Eldritch Wisdom should have been like labeled as arcane instead. So like coming into contact with the arcane would be a blessing, and things like that. So with that out of the way, there is a little bit more to say about that. It says, even if they are mad, it is fortunate for those who come into contact with the wisdom of the arcane, because it will become aid for future generations. That's where like the posterity comes from. And so the idea of people like coming into contact with like the arcane or like a supernatural cosmic force in Bloodborne, which causes them to go mad, is important, because that's like how the researchers, like the characters of the game, are like trying to come into contact and understanding of the universe that they've been living in. And so the idea of like the cosmos and things like that being related to the arcane is also related to how everything is like tied into death and the dreams and blood and things like that. And it'll be a lot clearer like once you get like the various tiers of cold blood, that like the Great One cold blood has what appears to be like cosmos within it. The skull of a madman or a person who's come into contact with the arcane gives us like what do you call it? Inhuman knowledge. That is a very big thematic tie within Bloodborne, and something that I really do want to emphasize as we continue throughout this playthrough. Hey, Devin guy, what's up, man? It's nice to see you. Yeah. This is my second lore through of me streaming the game, where I've been doing comparisons to the Japanese text. For anybody who doesn't know Devin guy, he's also a very avid streamer of Bloodborne. If you want to check out his channel and give him a follow, go feel free. I think he's pretty due for a lore through, so be excited to see him stream again and give him support when I can. So I did intentionally come back to the Hunter's Dream without using my insight yet, just to show that like the doll is still inactive. And after having opened like the first gate into Central Yharnam, that's what allows us access into the actual building of the Hunter's workshop. Devin says, I carry your lore streams, to be honest. No, you have a really good understanding of the lore. Like, I like to chime in when I can, just to provide some extra context. But I tend to see, like, a lot of this stuff as a collaborative effort. Like, I definitely wouldn't know as much about the game as I do if it wasn't for other people, like, before me having looked at everything and stuff like that. So, I mean, even on these streams, like, people will come in and ask me questions which might alter some of my perspective of things, or give me more perspectives to consider. It's always stuff I appreciate. helped you a lot, which helps you keep you on track when you go off the rails. Yeah, it's pretty fun to do, just to have that kind of a live interaction as you go through the game.
Aha! You must be the new hunter. Welcome to the hunter's dream. This will be your home for now. I am Gehrman, friend to you hunters. You're sure to be in a fine haze about now, but don't think too hard about all of this. Just go out and kill a few beasts. It's for your own good. You know, it's just what hunters do. You'll get used to it.
So this is obviously Gehrman, and one of the more fascinating things about his introduction there is that he seems to pause and struggle to remember his name. This could be foreshadowing that he has been captivated or possessed by the moon presence, and so he might not have full control over himself. He might currently be controlled by the moon presence and might be acting in accordance to its will. We aren't given like a ton of information as to how their relationship is fully characterized, so we just kind of have to play things by ear and kind of come to our own individual conclusions as to what we believe. I don't necessarily think that Gehrman is fully controlled by the moon presence. I do think he does have some semblance of individuality, but he is probably willing to some extent to fulfill his role and to carry out his duties as like the assistant of hunters. Remind you that this is more or less my interpretation of that, but I just wanted to highlight that as well. So Paladins is yes, the old pervert Gehrman. Yeah, we'll get to that very infamous line in just a moment as well. So his Japanese for that dialogue is extremely similar. I do like that the way that it is voice acted in English, because as far as like the Japanese script goes, like the Bloodborne, it did come out with like a dub later on. I honestly haven't really listened to it, but like if you just look at the text, it's just like a really long ellipsis. Whereas like in the English, like his voice acting, like you get like the kind of like grunts that go along with it. So the other last thing that I did want to mention about that is Gehrman's directive to us is to just go out and kill a few beasts. It's for our own good. I think that really does highlight that Gehrman probably doesn't have like a ton. This could be a ploy for the moon presence to have a hunter go out and just kill a bunch of things to harvest blood echoes for it to usurp from the hunter to kind of satiate its insatiable lust for blood and blood echoes and things like that, which ties into like the whole like pale blood or paled blood or drained blood kind of a imagery that it's got going on, and I'll talk a lot about that more later as well. Perhaps not the stream, just because it's going to be a very long playthrough, all things considered, with the commentary, but I'll just bring it up now for food for thought, really. So Darkman says this is the dream, so maybe he can't remember his real self that well. I would say, yeah, that's a possibility. The other possibility that I would bring up would be that since Gehrman is the very first hunter, he could have just been in the dream for so long and just on his own for so much that it might literally just be difficult for him to remember his identity or like what he's supposed to be called from others, because if you don't have anybody else around you to talk to, like you don't necessarily have to worry about what you're called. You're just kind of your own consciousness, like, so it could just be like memory loss or just a failure of age and things like that. And so as we look at him, we can tell that he's a very aged man. He's in a wheelchair and he has a walking stick, so the walking stick could just show that like he's frail, and so like while the wheelchair might not be like a necessarily like medical necessity, it's just something to help like ease his pains and his burdens as an old man. Devin says Gehrman's English voice actor is 10 out of 10. Honestly, like the voice actors in this game in general knock it out of the park. Like even like the hunts, like the normal enemies have really good voice acting. I struggle to think of like a bad voice actor for this game. Like, sure, like each voice might not be like everyone's cup of tea, but like I don't think there's really anything like super bad that I can think of that's on my head. So am I going for the childhood beginning ending? Potentially, I'll probably try to do all three endings. Like I don't have like a capture card, so I'd like have to cut the stream again. And but yeah, I do intend to show like childhood beginning and all of them really if I can. So. Your opinion, Gehrman is dead and this is his soul, kind of like Marie and Mikolash. Yeah, I think that's a very good interpretation as to like something that could have happened. One thing which does fascinate me about that though is that we can find his soul sleeping, which I mean we can also find the doll sleeping, and that's just something that just interests me in general. Like if these are their astral bodies and they sleep in a dream, like what do they sleep about when, or like what do they dream about when they're asleep in a dream? Just kind of Inception level questions, I suppose. So Devin says, you're pretty sure there's some cut dialogue from Gehrman where he mentions the dream is for the souls of hunters, but obviously they couldn't keep that in, so people confuse Bloodborne with DS lore. Sleep is death, huge parallels there. Yes, I talked about that towards the very beginning of the game. Like, I consider like the dream to be a kind of both metaphorical and literal middle ground between life and death, and sleep and unconsciousness, with sleep and waking being like those kind of like metaphorical equivalences to like life and death right there. So the dream sustains us. It's between sleep and full unconsciousness, and or like being awake and sleeping, and like being alive and dead. So Darkmoon says, well, this is like the cosmic version of him, isn't it? It's kind of like Ludwig in the DLC. Ah, my guiding moonlight. I think you can make arguments either way. Like, it's possible that his physical form did get pulled into the dream, especially with like the moon presence and things like that. And I'll talk about that more in just a moment.
This was once a safe haven for hunters. A workshop where hunters used blood to enhance their weapons and flesh. We don't have as many tools as we once did, but you're welcome to use whatever you find. Even the doll, should it please you.
And so that's like the quintessential creepy, perverted old man line, which a lot of people take to be very suggestive, and it certainly does sound that way at a glance. And just to kind of like reinforce that, like it's supposed to come across as creepily as well. Like the Japanese also kind of has like a similar flavor to it. Like it's not like outright explicitly supposed to be like sexual or anything like that, but it can be sexualized like within the mind of the beholder if you've got your mind in the gutter.
This was once your
So yeah, the doll as we see right now is inactive. If you don't know about her, is definitely extremely creepy. And once we use that Madman's Insight and revisit this area, we will find the doll come to life, metaphorically. So, if we look at Gehrman's right leg, or the left one on the screen, we see that he doesn't have a foot there. It's a peg. This could have been a result of him coming into contact with the moon presence, because once we do the honoring wishes ending and get grabbed and captivated by the moon presence ourselves, we will find that the hunter is pushed around in Gehrman's wheelchair and is also missing a leg. So this idea of like missing a leg could tie into like the imagery that we get with like some of these hunter marks and things like that. Gehrman could be like a metaphorical hanged man of this dream, this nightmare, suspended onto the dream by sacrificing himself for the moon presence to kind of keep him alive as like a surrogate, things like that. Gehrman can be seen as being like somewhat altruistic in that he tries to spare others from having his fate, but it's a little bit unclear as to why he would continue to do it when we can find him begging for Lawrence and Master Willem to free him from the dream. So, sorry for monologuing so long. I'll catch back up with the chat. So, Devin says, you came to the conclusion after a while that the use the doll dialogue is another degree of the moon presence's control, trying to coerce the hunter to level up and transfer blood echoes or some such. I will talk about that as soon as we activate the doll. So, Paladin says, although I believe most of the Yharnam's issues came from Lawrence's ambitions, he left Willem and founded the Healing Church with the others. Even though they wanted to use the old blood for good purposes, they ended up screwing up the city. Yeah, so a lot of like the themes in like Bloodborne is like, or like FromSoft games in general is like trying to prolong or subvert like the natural order of things, causes things to stagnate, become rotten, and degrade, and things like that. So, coming into the corner here, we do have like a behind the memory altar, which we can use for Carol runes later on. We have a note tucked into the corner, and it's held by messengers. It says, to escape this dreadful hunter's dream, halt the source of the spreading scourge of beasts, lest the night carry on forever. And so, I had mentioned earlier in the stream that at times the hunter's dream is called a hunter's nightmare in Japanese, like the exact same phrase as like the DLC location. So this part where it says dreadful hunter's dream in Japanese is more close to this provocative hunter's nightmare. So just want to mention that not always is the hunter's dream referred to as a dream. So I do believe that it's possible that Gehrman could have penned this note, just because when we talk to him at the very end of the game, he will also call it like the provocative hunter's nightmare. And so sometimes FromSoft will use very like specific terminology to tie certain things together. And so I think it's a possibility, although of course it can't be confirmed, that Gehrman, perhaps when he was a bit more lucid, or if he wasn't completely controlled by the moon presence, or if he, in a moment of weakened control, he could have penned this to tell us like what to do rather than just going out and killing a few beasts. So to elaborate on like the hidden message behind this, like the spreading scourge of beasts, like the source of that is essentially coming from two things, which is really all tied together. So the scourge of beasts is ultimately a product of the blood. So whoever has taken the blood will be susceptible to like transforming or being influenced by like the kind of cosmic things that we'll encounter over the course of the night. However, that being said, it seems as though if you only take a very small amount of the blood or something along those lines, you're not going to be as strongly affected as others. But it's kind of like the idea of vampirism being able to infect people from blood, or like werewolves and zombies, like the very common like horror tropes that we find throughout many forms of media. So what is causing this scourge to become exacerbated on our particular night of the hunt is two things. Most directly, it's the moon presence and its proximity towards Yharnam, and the secondary thing would be the voice of the crying baby Murgo, which is beckoning the moon presence towards Yharnam. So, in order to halt the source of the spreading scourge of beasts, it really means you need to stop Murgo's cries, because that is what's attracting the moon presence, which is causing like the very stimulated effects within the Yharnamites, which is causing them to transform and go mad over the course of the night. And that'll be a bit highlighted more as we like go along and talk to the NPCs after advancing like the time state of the game. So forgive me for that little bit of a long-winded speech there, but it's important to point out. Alright, so chat's all good. So now that that's all done, we're going to go ahead and use that Madman's Knowledge. And we'll return to the dream and talk to the doll and level up. And before I forget, I'll go ahead and talk to the false Yosefka to kind of make it worth our while. Or no, this is the real Yosefka. What am I saying? So coming back into Yosefka's clinic, this wasn't present before, but we've got the lantern appearing within the first floor sick room. We don't have a Cleric Beast. It's one of the few enemies which does not respawn within the game. I don't know if there's any like actual lore significance to that. It's just something we just have to accept as a matter of fact as we continue to play through the game. So if you like look through this like little crack here, you can see a woman in white robes behind this door, and her head, I believe, does track the player.
Out on the hunt? Then I'm very sorry, but I cannot open this door. I am Yosefka. The patients here in my clinic must not be exposed to infection. I know that you hunt for us, for our town, but I'm sorry. Please. This is all that I can do.
So from Yosefka, we gain Yosefka's blood vial. The imposter will not give us these directly.
Now, go. And good hunting. Are you still in need of something? But I have nothing more to offer. Please, try to understand my position. I can only pray for a fruitful hunt.
So there's some curious aspects to the real Yosefka's dialogue. She mentions she has patients in the back, and they must not be exposed to infection. As to who those patients are is a bit of a mystery. It could be the half-transformed celestial emissary we'll find later on. It could even be the fake Yosefka. We don't really know. Eventually this version of Yosefka will be replaced by an imposter doctor, which we lovingly call Yosefka in the lore community, and it's unclear as to whether or not like the real Yosefka does have any relation to the healing church or the choir and the experiments that both are running. It's pretty safe to make the conclusion that to some extent Yosefka must have had like some knowledge of experiments and things like that, because she does kind of have like a unique blood vial that's been refined after some experimentation of some sort. So looking at the description for Yosefka's blood vial, we see that it's a blood vial acquired from Yosefka's clinic. This refined blood, highly invigorating, restores a larger amount of HP. The product of a slow and careful refinement process, this rare blood vial appears to be a clinic original. The Japanese for that is pretty similar. I think perhaps one of the reasons why the fluid of this is yellow could be that it's supposed to represent like blood plasma as opposed to like the normal type of blood that we would see in like a blood vial. That would explain why it would have like a refinement process to be like derived from. And so I'm a little bit curious as to like how this would relate to restoring HP, like blood plasma versus like the blood vials, and whether or not like it is all related to blood echoes and things like that, since HP is derived from willpower. But unfortunately, it's just kind of like one of those things where we just have to take it as it is. So I do know that if you use like 5 of her blood vials, she'll give you like a little bit of a special dialogue where let me try to find it real quick. I'm not going to go ahead and use five of them just because it takes a lot of time to like restart and reload and all that. So let's see, where is it? Oh, okay, here it is. Filling our vial stock should say, "Ah, you are safe, thank goodness. But I'm afraid nothing will change my mind. I cannot open the door. I'll do what I can, of course. Perhaps this will help you, if only in some small way." She gives us the vial, and then she says, "This night is long, but morning always comes. Someone of your caliber won't fail us, I am certain. And once the night of the hunt ends, we can speak face to face. Then I can finally see what you look like. I shouldn't be thinking of this, but I am rather looking forward to it, so please be careful out there." And so that dialogue is the same whether or not the player is male or female. I think it's supposed to come across as a bit more romantic in nature, but
Are you still in? But I.
It doesn't really matter if you're like male or female. So it's. Did I use the vial or the knowledge? Okay, I did. It's just something that's a really nice like kind of Easter egg that like it does show that the characters are knowledgeable that like the night is long as opposed to other nights of the hunt or whatever's going on and things like that. And once we come back with some insight, we get the abandoned doll is standing up and moves as though it's a real living thing.
Hello, good hunter. I am a doll, here in this dream to look after you. Honorable hunter, pursue the echoes of blood, and I will channel them into your strength. You will hunt beasts, and I will be here for you to embolden your sickly spirit.
So a lot of the doll's dialogue does kind of tie into Gehrman's, and that she tells us to hunt beasts. And the reason for that is she will be able to take the blood echoes that we gain from beasts and transfer them into our strength. The exact mechanics for how that works is a bit unclear.
Very well. Let the echoes become your strength. Let me stand close. Now shut your eyes.
Within Japanese culture, it's pretty common for things like dolls to be used as kind of a what's the word? Substitutes for being able to take on a person's sins and things like that. So with the doll taking our blood echoes, it could be like the sins of like having slain like a bunch of creatures and things like that might be purified from the hunter and like be transformed into a way which we can harness as our own strength and not be I don't know what to call it exactly. Sinful is might be a bad word for it, but I'm just kind of failing to articulate my thought here.
Did you speak with Gehrman? He was a hunter long, long ago, but now serves only to advise them. He is obscure, unseen in the dreaming world. Still, he stays here, in this dream. Such is his purpose.
So, that bit of dialogue is pretty interesting because she says Gehrman is obscure in the waking world, which could be interpreted like a myriad of different ways. In that, like, is his legacy obscured now because so much time has elapsed? Has his body been transferred into the hunter's dream, and is that why he's obscure in the waking world? It's a bit of a mystery.
Ah, the little ones, inhabitants of the dream. They find hunters like yourself, worship and serve them. Speak words they do not. But still, aren't they sweet?
So, of course, like the little ones she's talking about right there are the little messengers off to the side right there. She does say that they find hunters like yourself, they worship and serve them. So that might be a revelation that hunters are first found by the messengers, and like it might be that the hunters gain their kind of a supernatural mastery over death because the messengers have granted that ability onto them. I did fail to mention it before, like towards the beginning of the game, that the term used for messenger in Japanese is shisha, which literally means like emissary or like the equivalent of like a messenger, which shouldn't be a surprise. But it's also a homophone, which could be a way to say like a dead person or a deceased person. So it's possible to interpret messenger as like messenger or dead person, essentially. And so I know that's a bit redundant, but when we look at the messengers, we can see that they kind of have like those skeletal gaunt figures. So I think even though they have a different kanji which represents them, obviously.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world.
There's like a lot of wordplay that gets used in FromSoft games to kind of like convey more than what's there at a surface level, and so I think it's really noteworthy in terms of like helping understand like the context of Bloodborne as a whole, in terms of like the wills of the dead are contained within blood. Messengers might literally be the dead people, which would also tie into like how we see messengers as soon as we're given that blood transfusion in the beginning of the game, and things like that. So consume insight and ring the beckoning bell to enlist the cooperation of hunters from other worlds. Silencing blink and such forms of cooperation. So the beckoning bell and the silencing blink. And then we get the old hunter bell from these ones up here. And I did forget to look at it earlier, but there's another like fountain over here. At the first part of the game, when there aren't messengers in it, it says like this bath is linked to the nightmare, same as like the hunter's stump over there. So this is the insight bath, and so we can use insight to buy items from here. So the only ones available right now are the small resonant bell and the pungent blood cocktail. So I did forget to look at the cocktails from the dark room in Central Yharnam, so we'll go ahead and read that now, as well as the other items that we've gathered. So this is mature blood cocktail that releases a pungent blood odor when thrown that attracts bloodthirsty beasts. A precious tool in sadly short supply. In Yharnam they produce more blood than alcohol, as the former is more intoxicating. So this is one of the cooler items for sure to help understand like the state of the world of Yharnam, because in real life, like alcohol is like the staple of civilization. It's kind of like the uniting thing for cultures, for people to bond over and things like that. And so for alcohol to have been given like a secondary role to blood just because it's more intoxicating, I think should be considered like very telling as to like how addictive or how effective like the blood of Yharnam is, really. So whatever is in the blood cocktails causes like beasts to become attracted to them, most likely due to the scent. And one thing that I do think is a possible interpretation to take from that could be that like the hunter might normally smell something like the pungent blood cocktail, like whatever causes it to be pungent is what attracts beasts, and the beasts are attracted to the hunter unless we throw this. So this might just be like a more like fermented or like a stronger version of what the hunter might smell like. But that being said, it is important to note that not Adela, but Ariana says like the hunter does smell different from blood and beast. So whatever blood smells like, the hunter does smell different to it to some degree. So it's worth pointing out. So yeah, the Japanese for that is very similar as well, just a little bit of a flavor difference really. So next we have the small resonant bell. It's a small bell discovered in the old underground labyrinth. Its ring resonates across worlds, and the first hunter used it as a special signal to call hunters from other worlds to cross the gap and cooperate. This bell resonates with its counterpart, the beckoning bell, ring to help hunters in other worlds. And this is a non-line only item, so that's what that last note is about. So it is interesting that it says it's the first hunter specifically using this to beckon hunters from other worlds, because I mean, if Gehrman's the first hunter, I mean, Gehrman would have used this item. It was discovered in the underground labyrinth, which is noteworthy as well. So if there are already hunters in other worlds, when Gehrman was using this, it's just really questionable like how everything really fits together. I think you just kind of explained it as like a multiverse theory that like you summon the protagonists of other worlds to help you, and so it might just be like the old hunters that we can summon with this bell are essentially like that world's version of you, and so it might not necessarily be like that they're all like super relevant and have their own stories. It could just be something that's just a bit repeated, or that would help explain like why defectors and like Defector and Tal would fight against like the Skull of Mensis monsters and things like that. So the last note I want to make about this item is it says a human must use insight to ring this. Oh, I'm looking at the other one. Okay, so yeah, okay. It's the beckoning bell that I need to look at next. So the beckoning bell is a great old bell discovered in the underground labyrinth. Its ring resonates across worlds, and the first hunter used it as a special signal to call hunters from other worlds to cross the gap and cooperate. A human must use insight to ring this uncanny bell, but the benefits of cross-world cooperation are many. The Japanese is fairly similar for the most part. The only thing I do want to really highlight about it is, rather than saying that it's an uncanny bell, it's more along the lines of an arcane bell, like the same Shinpi that I mentioned earlier in relation to Eldritch Wisdom and Eldritch Truth is the same word that they use to describe the arcane stat, and so this idea of like the arcane being related to crossing the barriers between worlds is very relevant throughout the entire game, and it's a little bit of a shame that they just didn't use consistent terminology to highlight that. Trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, we did pick up the throwing knife, and I forgot to talk about that. So we got some of these throwing knives from the rats over in the aqueducts. So throwing knife with a finely serrated blade, one of the old hunter Henrik's favorite weapons, does not cause a great deal of damage to beasts, but with deft use can distract attackers and keep them at bay. So I do think there is a certain amount of significance to the drops of some enemies as far as their items are concerned. However, I don't necessarily think that's a very good creed to like live and die by as far as like lore interpretations go, because it's very unlikely that like Henrik was just throwing knives at rats all day. Like sometimes you just have to just go with it and just say like, yeah, there's no real reason why rats have throwing knives as opposed to like crows having pebbles. But oh, and the music box from the little girl. Okay, so this is a small music box received from a young Yharnam girl. Plays a song shared by her mother and father. Inside the lid is a small scrap of paper, perhaps an old message. Two names can be made out, however faintly: Viola and Gascoigne. So this does reveal that Gascoigne's wife is Viola, and that will be relevant later when we do encounter him as a boss. The Old Hunter Bell is one of the resonating bells that cross the gaps of worlds. This bell is cracked and stained with the blood of beasts. A human must expend insight to ring this uncanny bell. The old hunters who have long passed from the dream but cannot forget the feeling of the hunt rely upon messengers to relay their thoughts. Ring the bell at their side, and they are certain to give a listen, for the night of the hunt is long and unchanging. As you may imagine, the idea of the Old Hunter Bell being an uncanny bell is exactly the same thing. It's an arcane bell in Japanese, or shinpi, which could be mystic or sacred, mystery, things like that. As far as everything else goes, it's pretty much very similar to the Japanese. It just does show that like sound can traverse dimensions, and it's related to like the arcane and all that stuff. So the silencing plank is, it says that hunters are linked by the resonance of bells with special encoded timbers. This inaudible burst disrupts such resonance. Fire to end cooperation and prevent further cooperation. Firing this does not disrupt the resonance of a sinister bell. So that's a bit more of like an online item. The sinister bell is what's used for like invaders to come and gank the player. I think the idea of special encoded timbers is supposed to be like a representative of like things like frequencies and vibrations in general. Or that gets to be like a bit more of like tinfoil, like pseudoscientific territory. I will go into a bit more of that tinfoily pseudoscientific theory later on when we get some more of the bells and encounter some more of like the chiming sounds of enemies and bosses as we encounter them. But just for now, I just want to bring that up to keep in the backs of our minds for when we get there. So I did forget to read the oil urn, and it says when this urn hits the mark, or hits its mark, the target is drenched in oil and made extremely flammable. Fire is commonplace on the hunt, and oil urns accentuate its effect. Sometimes when hunters burn beasts, they appear intoxicated by the euphoria of purification. I honestly don't remember the Japanese version of this. Yeah, it's actually pretty similar. I do like the English for this. It's got a pretty good like flow to it. So okay, I think that's everything in the Hunter's Dream. Oh, I did forget to just kind of point out the skybox. So at this point in the game, we've got a very like kind of blue and white sky. As we progress, the skybox will change. So just kind of want to point it out now that I remember it. So we should do the same when we go to Central Yharnam. So going back through this area will lead us back to the Great Bridge. I didn't really show a whole lot of it off earlier. It's not that big of a deal, but I'll show it off like once we get past like the Scourge Beast. Oh, that sucks. So, right above us is that Great Bridge that Gilbert was talking about. Well, I suppose he didn't really directly talk about, but it does lead directly towards like the Grand Cathedral over there. So this will be a shortcut past the aqueduct later on, which we haven't activated yet. And so this just kind of like loops back towards the dark room where we were before. Like those were like the kennels, and that little shortcut that I took was. Oh, didn't mean to aggro the dog, but whatever. So this is where that cold blood was, if I remember correctly. And then this is back to the dark house. So this guy right here will pretty much always drop 4 blood vials, or quicksilver bullets. So this is a pretty decent farming zone for the very beginning of the game, because the 2 brick trolls over there typically drop a couple blood vials as well. And this is where like the talking enemies from earlier were, in this very dark room up here. So this little corpse right here is to draw the player away with their greed, or this guy in the darkness to ambush us. So this is that bridge where we walked over to the plaza from before. There's 2 scourge beasts right here. They can hit extremely hard for this portion of the game and have a pretty large pool of health, so they're really hard to deal with because I don't like it's really hard to only aggro just one of them. You can kind of cheese them by just running into this building once you've gotten their attention, because they cannot fit through the door. And so if you got like a long-range weapon like the threaded cane or the transformed axe, you can continue to like hit them through here. I know it's a bit lame to play this way, but it's really effective and somewhat efficient for the time, because you see how many like hits it takes to kill it. So it's probably see, like that takes away like half my health right there. So try to rally a little bit. And so, as long as there's like only one of them, they're pretty easy to like just kind of get to their sides and continue to spam attacks against. Or like fish for viscerals, although like with them being on steps, it's pretty inconsistent to land them. And from their corpses we might get some bloodstone shards, but blood vials are their more common drop for sure. Alright, so this is the little path that I took towards the aqueduct earlier. That's the crucified scourge beasts, and like I did like to see how those like little Yharnamites just kind of popped in with their torchlight abruptly appearing out of nowhere. So when we examine the bridge, like it doesn't really lead anywhere. There's like just a building here, so it doesn't really attach to much. And there's no ramps here, so why there's these gigantic carriages is anyone's guess, really. And coming into this area, we get like a lot more of the idols of the healing church on display. They're kind of haphazardly strewn around. And these ones with the lamps on them do have like a Thumerian equivalent where they've got like these skeletal type figures calling up the figure of like a robed, most likely woman. So it seems like a good possibility that like the religion of the healing church or the religion in Yharnam could have existed before the healing church came onto the scene, or like the healing church could have just kind of like stolen the previous imagery of the town or the city or whatever you want to call it. So we get some more dead horses and a brick troll surrounded by a bunch of crows. Got some blood vials. I do like the cane's potential for just kind of like dealing with the crows pretty efficiently. You can stay at a range and for the most part avoid their attacks. However, that being said, like the cane is not super effective against enemies like the Cleric Beast because it doesn't do like too great of a job with like breaking its limbs and doing a lot of damage early game. So I might die a few times against the Cleric Beast. Like for whatever reason, it tends to give me problems with the threaded cane as opposed to like the cleaver. So that's the Cleric Beast. We see it kind of jump towards us from the direction of the Cathedral Ward. If we skip the Cleric Beast now, like, and go to the Cathedral Ward, we don't really see it just chilling up there, so it's a little bit of a shame that it doesn't quite work out, but oh no, damn it, dodged the wrong way. So the Cleric Beast design is probably influenced by that of a Wendigo, like an Algonquin kind of a mythological beast. It's kind of like a deer man with gigantic antlers. Within a lot of cultures, deer are kind of a regal or divine figure because like their antlers are almost like a kind of what do you call it, a natural crown or like a halo type effect. It's a little bit hard to focus at times, like and talk at the same time. So I respect a lot of streamers who are able to like keep that very active chat life going as they're playing games. But I do want to mention like one of the interesting aspects about like Wendigo in terms of like the Cleric Beast design is, despite like having like the visual imagery which aligns, like the mythology of them also works out really well as well, because like part of the reason that they're remembered as like a mythological beast is that they are said to have like come from the spirits of, or not spirits, but like men who have become like cannibalistic in nature, and their bloodlust is what causes them to transform into Wendigo, and they have like an insatiable hunger for human flesh or blood. I don't remember exactly. Oh yeah, that's not a yoga. How it works out. I just hate how long it takes to hurt this boss so early on in the game. I thought I was going to die on the wall. Oh. And so, to just tie some of that idea of like a Wendigo and like deer and things together, it's notable that like the Cleric Beast is a cleric. It very clearly says so with its name, that it must have like an attachment or affiliation with the healing church, obviously, in that if like a divine being like a cleric can be corrupted by like the blood to transform into like a terrible beast, that should just be evidence of like what is really going on with the blood. And so if like the imagery of both a cleric and like a kind of divine or graceful creature like a deer has been corrupted, it should just speak to the nature of the blood. And so, as far as like some of its visual design, like the Cleric Beast also has like those large exposed ribs, which could show like it's kind of a hunger or insatiable. It always wants more. And with its really long or like very hairy like left arm, it could just be representative of like a part of the corruption that comes with like the left-hand path. I haven't talked about that on this playthrough yet, but one of the potential influences for like the enemies in the game comes from something within like Buddhism. It's or like Hinduism, where like by coming into contact with like filth and corruption and things like that, provides an alternate path for for coming into contact with the divine. And so that might be why certain beasts or certain Yharnamites have their like left arms exposed and so long, because it's something like aligned with like the sinister path of things. Oh no. Okay, got the visceral off. I was a little bit lucky. I don't know what the deal with that was. Like, I tried to attack, but it didn't go. I mean, I would have been punished anyway. I was just... Another camera boss. So that animation right there is when bosses will regenerate some of their limbs, so they can be like broken again. When the Cleric Beast like has like a bunch of blood come out of like one of its limbs and gets staggered for a bit, that's it being its limb being broken. And so like just right there, I essentially broke its head, which is what allowed for that visceral attack opportunity. I'm surprised that hit. Pretty bad about using items in like a lot of my games. So that was me breaking its other limb. I should have gone in right there. Oh, how'd that one miss, but the other one's hit? Alright, so after that very long fight this early in the game, we get the Sword Hunter badge. And a lantern will appear after the beast has been defeated. And from that we can light it to access the Hunter's Dream. Early on in development, many people already know this, this door was supposed to be able to connect into the Cathedral Ward, which could have potentially just given us an alternate route that way, potentially sparing Father Gascoigne, although that's really just conjecture and there's really nothing to support that idea with Father Gascoigne. Although this door does still link up there, it's pretty well thought that the reason why this door doesn't link up is because the PS4 originally wasn't fast enough to be able to load Central Yharnam quickly enough from the Cathedral Ward, so that's why I kind of got the axe. And so, originally coming into contact with the Cleric Beast and like killing it does give the player more what I would call like ambient insight. So if I didn't have the Madman's knowledge earlier and use it, right now it would have been like the first time that we would have been able to see the doll awake and use our blood echoes with her. So after defeating the Cleric Beast, we get the Sword Hunter badge. It's one of the badges crafted by the Healing Church. The silver sword is a symbol of a church hunter. Ludwig was the first of many Healing Church hunters to come, many of whom were clerics. As it was, clerics transformed into the most hideous beasts. So this is like there isn't a lot of information as to the identity of the Cleric Beast. Some people believe that since we gain the Sword Hunter badge from it, and that the Sword Hunter badge will unlock the following items from like the messenger shop, like the Kirk hammer and the repeating pistol, and Henriette uses those, that it could potentially tie the identity of Henriette to the Cleric Beast. For what it's worth, in like the cut content of the game, the Cleric Beast was referred to as Father Norbert. When we look at the fresh or the living liver of the Cleric Beast, it says it's Father Norbert's liver. So either way, I think there's a potential in the final version of the game where you could read as like the Cleric Beast being related to Henriette, although that's more like a acceptable headcanon than anything concrete, unfortunately. So the Kirk hammer is a trick weapon typically used by Healing Church hunters. On the one side, the other, a giant obtuse stone weapon characterized by a blunt strike and extreme force of impact. The Church takes a heavy-handed, merciless stance toward the plague of beasts, an irony not lost upon the wielders of this most symbolic weapon. The Japanese for this is, I think there is a big difference somewhere. I always forget about it. I know like the name, instead of like calling it a Kirk hammer, it's the Stone Church hammer. I definitely prefer Kirk hammer as a localization flair. I don't know if like Kirk is German for church or anything like that, but it's got a better ring than Stone Church hammer in my opinion. So it's said to be a multifaceted weapon with an easily handled silver blade and a gigantic stone hammer, the latter of which is characterized by the particularly strong concussive force of its heavy blows, which means like it's blunt damage. The Healing Church Workshop, one of the two hunter trick weapon factions, is said to have been previously nestled somewhere in Cathedral Ward. Okay, yeah, that's the real big difference. So you can see that that's a very, very different like final paragraph. I think I never looked at the Korean to be sure of this, but I'm pretty sure like there's a few items that were updated in the Japanese like draft of the game, but those updates didn't make it into English or like the other languages, and so I wouldn't be surprised if the Kirk hammer is one of them. So I know the Ludwig's holy rifle and his blade have like differing final paragraphs, and like one of them is the updated one, and they just kind of missed out on the other one. So I don't remember which is which off the top of my head. But so the Kirk hammer does establish that the Healing Church Workshop is a brand of workshop of like one of two, and like Gehrman's workshop would have been the other one. So that does set up that like Gehrman's workshop was nestled somewhere in the Cathedral Ward, and or no, sorry, the Healing Church workshop was in the Cathedral Ward, and that's like one of the only indicators of that. I mean, it's not exactly like a secret by any means, but it's pretty explicitly stated in the Japanese description of this weapon, whereas the English is very different overall. So we get the repeating pistol, and it's a repeating pistol typically used by healing church hunters. Crafted with mostly metal parts and exhibiting a complex design, the repeating pistol fires 2 shots at once, making it a ravenous consumer of quicksilver bullets. Should be used sparingly compared to its workshop counterpart as the trump card in one's arsenal. So the workshop counterpart is probably just like the hunter's pistol that we're using. In Japanese, the repeating pistol is more literally like the double-barreled pistol. I think double-barreled makes more sense because like you're firing 2 bullets at once. Like it doesn't necessarily repeat a fire of a bullet. So if there's no lag or time delay between them, like it fires both at once. So that's a pretty minor, all things considered. And yeah, okay. So the only like real difference is the English just calls this the trump card in one's arsenal, whereas that's not really in the Japanese. But I'm not too worried about stuff like that. Like maybe because it doesn't have much of a significant impact on the lore. And we can also gain the Hunter Chief emblem from having the Saw Hunter badge. So it's a cloth emblem that belonged to the captain of the church hunters long ago. Opens the main gate that leads to the round plaza of the great cathedral. The main gate is shut tight on nights of the hunt and can only be opened from the other side with this emblem. In other words, the captain's return and this emblem determined the end of the hunt. So it doesn't literally mean that like showing this emblem to the gate causes the night of the hunt to be ended. It just means like whenever the hunt was ended, like the chief would return to the gate and then hold it up to be let back into the cathedral ward. It does show that there is like a kind of a tradition within the healing church for that to happen. As far as the Japanese goes, it's very similar for the most part. I do want to point out, like on the image itself of the emblem, we get like the symbol for communion for the healing church, and we will see that kind of a thing more often once we access like the later areas of the game. We did get a Bold Hunter's mark. I don't really remember where from. I should be paying more attention to when we pick up new items. Oh no, this is the shop, of course, duh. So this is a dangling upside down rune etched in the mind of a hunter. The image upon this parchment allows one to envision the rune with clarity. Allows a hunter to awaken again without losing blood echoes. A trick that seems nearly too good to be true. So that final part about like the trick being too good to be true is just might be like a little bit strong of a difference for me. The Japanese just says it's more like a truly good, convenient technique. So it's not necessarily too good to be true. It's just something that's very valuable and convenient for hunters to know. So rather than saying like losing blood echoes, it's more like a hunter can redo an awakening without abandoning their dying wells of blood or their blood echoes. So that's a little bit of a nuanced difference in my opinion, but oh, okay. So there is a pretty big difference in the Japanese. It says this charm is an imitation, and from it allows one to clearly have a vision of the symbol. So I suppose this isn't necessarily like this parchment itself doesn't necessarily have the power. It's being able to visualize it within the mind of the hunter, which gives it its power. So that's a pretty interesting semantic difference, I suppose. And then we can also buy the hand lantern, just a small portable lantern. This hunting accessory provides light while leaving both hands free to hold weapons. The torch, however, provides a stronger source of light. That's pretty straightforward as well. We will be purchasing that. It's a very good item for lore runs, because as it says, you can use it to like gain a bit of light without having to use the torch. And then from the brick trolls, we did get some shining coins, and there are various coins that are particularly luminous. There are very few uses for spare change during the hunt, but these will serve as guides through the darkness, or one can save them until morning if it ever comes. The Japanese for that is pretty similar. You could use these like Hansel and Gretel as like their breadcrumbs or pebbles to like remind you of where you were. You can also use these to like show where maps were supposed to align. So that's like how people were able to figure out like that door after the Cleric Beast was supposed to be attached to Central Yharnam, because you could find like the shining coins like shining through the door in that area as well. So I think that's everything in here. I know why I was doing so little damage. I forgot to upgrade my weapon. So yeah, you can go to the Hunter's Workshop right here. You use the workbench to fortify your weapons with bloodstone shards. And I guess I could have only upgraded it once, and it's not going to make a ton of difference. But the majority of the damage really comes from weapon upgrades in this game. Like, stats don't matter a ton until scaling comes
What is it you desire?
The picture, which is still kind of gated behind upgrading the weapons.
Very well. Let me. Farewell, good hunt. May.
So the doll doesn't say anything after the Cleric Beast or anything like that.
Good hunter.
I think I'm going to go talk to the imposter Yosefka just to show like nothing really changes. And then Gilbert, and then probably call the stream for the night there. I do want to typically go for about 3 hours. I'm definitely fine with going over, but it's a lot of talking for one night or one session, so it's also getting pretty late. But after talking to Gilbert, it'll be a good point to stop, because then we can just proceed on with like going to Father Gascoigne for the next stream.
You're safe, thank goodness. But I'm afraid nothing will change. I cannot open the door. I'll do what I can, of course. Perhaps this will help you, if only in some small way. Now go. I pray for your safety.
And I didn't mention it before, but like the real Iosefka, you can see her hand through that like little gap in the window there. She doesn't hold a weapon, so that also symbolizes that she's the real Iosefka, whereas the imposter doctor has the threaded cane, I think, in her hand. Or, oh, yeah. So after defeating the Cleric Beast, we couldn't get through that door to go into the Cathedral Ward, so that would provide like the lore reason for going back to talk to Gilbert and getting more insight as to what to do next.
Yes, I see. But the Great Bridge is the only way to the Cathedral Ward. And during the hunt, the bridge is closed. You could try the aqueduct. There's a rather, how shall I put it, Carlifle area south of the Great Bridge. From there, an aqueduct leads to the Cathedral Ward. Not a place you'd normally want to visit, but I don't imagine you have much of a choice, do you?
So, Gilbert mentions the aqueduct, and that's kind of what reveals that it's an aqueduct. The Japanese is a little bit clearer, and then it's like for sewage. I couldn't necessarily find anything to support that it's actually an aqueduct. I know the art book mentions that like the building in there is part of a dry docks, which is where like you would repair a ship out of water. Like you can drain the water from the area to work on repairing ships and things like that. So I don't think calling it an aqueduct is a bad translation or anything like that, but just a little bit of difference and nuance there, I suppose. He does mention like that the Great Bridge is closed. That's why we should go to that direction and try to go in through a different route.
An aqueduct leads from the town south of the main bridge to the Cathedral Ward. Not a place you'd normally choose to visit, but not much of a choice with the bridge closed.
So the second to last line there about not a place you'd normally choose to visit, in Japanese just says it's a place that outsiders normally wouldn't be able to get to, so that's just a little bit of a difference between the text as well. So that's pretty much it.
And
so I want to thank everybody for stopping by and everyone who dropped comments throughout this episode of the stream. I'll be uploading these to YouTube. I do have a Discord as well. I believe it's linked onto my channel. I should probably double check that and add it if it's not, but I'll be running these streams from 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every day until we conclude it. So go ahead and feel free to leave a follow if you're interested in continuing on with this this journey as we examine the lore of Bloodborne. And thanks, and have a good night.